Bueno, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Bueno, buenas tardes.
So good afternoon and welcome to this seminar entitled Artificial Intelligence Policies for the Action from Theory to Implementation. Thank you very much and congratulations and, well, thank you really for being here. My name is Agustina Adriano, Coordinator of Institutional Relations and Development in Club de Madrid, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies today. It is a great pleasure for me to be here. And we have a long session ahead of us, well, 3 sessions, in fact, with top-level experts, and time is of the essence. And so it will be the task of the facilitators to be able to manage the time of the session. So good luck with that. Good luck with that complex task. There will be interpretation into English, channel 1, English, channel 2, Spanish, okay? You have to connect your headphones into the system in order to be able to choose your language. Having said that, and without further ado, it is a pleasure to give the floor to the welcoming words, starting with our host, Senator Manuel Escarda, Chairman of the Commission of Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation of the Senate of Spain. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Mr. and Mrs. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas.
Welcome to all of you. Welcome. Dear authorities, dear members of Club de Madrid, former prime ministers and presidents. We have the whole globe represented here. Dear MPs, senators, managing directors, well, speakers and experts on the topic. Today, this chamber, the Senate of the Kingdom of Spain, would like to give the opportunity to exchange thoughts, ideas, and proposals about the technological development, the speedy technological development, in a world that is more interconnected and interdependent. All of us are aware of the need to regulate, legislate, and promote the quick development of artificial intelligence. In January 2020, the White House from the US published a memorandum that includes a set of principles that need to be taken into consideration by the different organizations that are part of the federal government and that develop artificial intelligence. The document, Memorandum for the Heads of Executive Departments and Agencies Maintaining American Leaders in Artificial Intelligence, focuses on strengthening the leadership of the United States in this sector. And it's guidelines for all the institutions developing artificial intelligence, trying to protect technology, economy, security, and obviously civil freedoms. Those American values, other American values, such as human rights, the rule of law, and the respect for intellectual property. The Council of the European Union made a communiqué, a press release on the 6th of December 2022 regarding the need to have a legislation on artificial intelligence. The Council urged for artificial intelligence that is safe and respects fundamental rights. The Council took its position, a common position, the general guidance on that legislation on artificial intelligence in order to make sure that AI systems that are used in the EU are safe and protect fundamental rights as well. And I'm sure this afternoon we'll talk long about this, about common values. And here in Spain, just to conclude, the Chamber of Digital Transformation and Economic Affairs approved on the 1st of October 2020 a bill in order to create a study commission that will look at adopting the new technological realities that are social but also disruptive at the request of the Popular Party in the Senate and with inclusion of an amendment presented by the Socialist Party. The text was the following approved. The Commission of Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation of the Senate agreed to create a working group that will looking into potential legislation, and that was done with two main axes. First, the social implications due or derived from digital transformation, and secondly, artificial intelligence challenges, legislation, and ethical and technical issues. In that initiative, they spoke about the different reasons that force researchers, political leaders, companies, and the social and the civil society to have the appropriate framework to promote artificial intelligence. And in order to do so, they carried out a working committee, and soon, currently this is already on the website, this will be published soon, and it will be a clear guidance. And we must say that the conclusions were approved by all the members of the chamber. And I give the floor now to Celso Delgado, Chairman of the Commission of the Spanish Parliament, also for Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation, but of the Parliament. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear Danilo Turk, President, Chairman of the Club de Madrid, Mr. Antonio Vargas from Amazon Web Service, a great company, dear Chairman of the Committee of Economic Affairs, Mr. Escarda, authorities, MPs, senators, ladies and gentlemen. I think we should be really thankful that this chamber is hosting this seminar that without a doubt will be trending. It talks about we will talk about artificial intelligence, a topic that I'm sure is in our minds and in the constant works of the Committee of Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation, as well as the committees on new technologies. And this seminar is very appropriate to host it now because we are at a turning point on digital transformation thanks to the development of new technologies such as 5G, cloud, blockchain, big data. But the most revolutionary technology is without a doubt artificial intelligence, as it may affect industrial processes, services, public authorities, and life in general for all of us, for all the citizens. This seminar is very important because it brings together experts, legislators, regulators, and policymakers, and everyone participating in this field. Over the last few weeks, hundreds of experts, or tens of experts, I would say, have thought about whether we should have a moratorium on artificial intelligence in order to assess the risks of its speedy growth. Sometimes it develops so quickly that we don't know exactly where we are going. The truth is that Spain doesn't work on its own. We are part of the European Union, and the European Commission for years now has been trying to legislate artificial intelligence. And we are about to have an EU legislation on this. They said it was about to be published. Now they're saying that they are rethinking it, revisiting it, and I believe that the events make it necessary for us to have that legislation. In the Parliament, about a year ago, we had a very interesting seminar on digitization and social challenges, also in collaboration with our friends from Amazon Web Service. And a great professor, Mr. Pedreño, said that legislation on artificial intelligence has to be efficient and has to focus on opportunities and not so much on risks. And he highlighted a statement, I'm not sure if it's of agreement here, but that he said that artificial intelligence would allow for the largest economies to double their growth rates over the next 15 years, and that Spain could generate 1 million jobs over the next 4 years if we were able to lead this technology. And also at the same time, he recommended, and that's why we're interested in knowing the conclusions of this seminar here today, because that expert said that we shouldn't be too hasty when legislating, because preventive legislation without knowing the topic in depth could lead to undesired effects. In any case, we're waiting to see what the European Parliament will say about this. And I would like to conclude by saying that I think it's a great effort for Spain to lead in the development of an ethical and humanistic AI, and the fact that in Spain we have created the state bodies for the oversighting of AI that will be in La Coruña, in the northwest of Spain. That means that we are going to have a Spanish digital agenda for 2026, and that is going to have great importance in the Spanish strategy on AI. And without a doubt, this work will have to continue regardless of the political changes that may take place in the government, because this is a key issue for Spain and for our nation, and we want it to be successful. So thank you very much, and I wish you great success. Thank you very much, Mr. Delgado, MP Delgado, and from Amazon Web Service, and the main partner here, we have with us Antonio Vargas, Head of Public Policies for Iberia from Amazon Web Services. Dear members of the two legislative chambers in Spain, dear authorities, it is an honor to be here with all of you and a privilege to be able to discuss these topics. Thank you, Senator Scarda, for hosting this at the Senate. Dear MP Delgado and Managing Director Esteban and all authorities. Thank you to Madrid, and thank you to Club de Madrid and Mr. Turk for proposing this discussion, which is comes in a very timely fashion. And thank you also to METEC for joining us, representing the technological industry in our country. And thank you for joining this initiative together with the AI Summit that will take place next Wednesday in Madrid, which means this week as a whole will become a good forum for AI just before Spain takes on the Spanish presidency of the EU. We are leading right now today the discussion on AI, and we have many examples of our country's commitment to this topic and about what will be discussed this afternoon. For instance, the Spanish strategy on AI, or the report on the adoption of a regulation for the new disruptive and social technologies that the Committee of Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation approved under Mr. Scarda, or the regulation or legislation on artificial intelligence, the AI Act, or the decision by Spain to host a pilot sandbox in order to develop an AI that is responsible, focused on human beings, or the Center for Algorithmic Transparency of the European Commission, headquartered in Seville. And I would also like to add the recent published strategy service for hybrid services on the cloud. The cloud is the area where all these digital initiatives take place, such as AI. So the leaders and governments try to balance two different interests. On the one hand, positioning the country in the right place so that it can make the most of the financial and social benefits that these technologies offer, and on the other, to have the appropriate policies to manage the challenges that these technologies that are so disruptive will bring forward. Public policies and technology must and should work hand in hand and become allies. That's why policymakers and leaders of technological initiatives and innovation should work together in order to make sure that we legislate AI based on the strict analysis of their potential challenges, making sure that we protect the fundamental rights of our citizens, and also making sure that it promotes, urges, and optimizes innovation. In Amazon Web Services, or AWS, we are committed with having an international discussion that is plural and open, where all the players involved can have a dialogue in order to promote the goodness, the public good of AI. And I would like to talk also about transatlantic cooperation, talking about the great work done by Club de Madrid by bringing together participants and representatives from Latin America and from Europe. And I would also like to highlight the importance of having a harmonized governance on artificial intelligence that is interoperable and that is based on cooperation between countries and continents. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Antonio.
Thank you very much, Antonio. And to conclude this first round, let me introduce Danilo Turk, Chairman of Club de Madrid, former President of Slovenia from 2007 till 2012. You have the floor.
Thank you. It's a great privilege and pleasure to say a few introductory remarks at this meeting on operationalizing artificial intelligence policies for innovation, moving from principles to practice. I would like especially to thank Mr. Manuel Escarda, President of the Commission for the Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation of the Spanish Senate, who is also host of today's Artificial Intelligence Policy Day, and Mr. Celso Delgado, President of the Commission for Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation of the Spanish Congress of Deputies. It's an honor to have both Manuel Escarda and Celso Delgado as representatives of the two chambers that represent Spanish democracy. And it's an honor to have this Artificial Intelligence Policy Day in the Senate, a house loaded with symbolism that evokes the very essence of democracy in Spain. And democracy evolves, and artificial intelligence should be an important part of that evolution. Now, I would also like in particular to thank the Amazon Web Services, Mr. Antonio Vargas, who is representing the Amazon Web Services here, head of the Public Policy Iberia, who is co-organizing this Artificial Intelligence Policy Day, where we shall be addressing one of the crucial challenges of the artificial intelligence in today's societies, the impact of AI in our lives, that we can take together as society to cooperate for the benefit of all. And then I'd like to thank Antonio Simora, the Director of Digital Transformation and Enabling Technologies, supporter of this activity. And last but not least, I would like to thank for participation two of my fellow members of Club de Madrid, Jorge Quiroga, former President of Bolivia, and Mr. Esko Aho, former Prime Minister of Finland, together with Cristina Manzano, who is our Board of Directors member. So Club de Madrid is very strongly represented. A small number of members, but with a strong representation at this meeting. I would like to explain that Club de Madrid is the largest organization of former democratically elected presidents and prime ministers. We have more than 100 members from around 70 countries, and we are working to strengthen the inclusive democratic practice for most, and also to making all the efforts necessary if possible to strengthen quality of democracy in countries around the world. We're also striving for a more robust multilateral system and inclusive cooperation that leaves no one behind. So our agenda is complex and ambitious. We try to help, and of course we need to be helped. Digital transformation is one of the challenges which the Club de Madrid has been working on for years. Especially, we have been analyzing the implications of digital technologies and artificial intelligence for democracy and also for multilateral cooperation, as we regard it, along with climate change, as one of the main potentially and practically disruptive trends that must be tackled to ensure and that it is harnessed for good through the people-centered approaches. And in order to come closer to that ambitious idea, we are favoring and we are working for multi-stakeholder dialogues. And today is one of the important moments of this multi-stakeholder dialogues, bringing together legislators, business leaders and experts, and governance experts. And this combination of participants is essential to chart the correct way towards forward in a sector that is changing at an amazing speed and makes hard for regulation to keep up. Artificial intelligence has become both an object and a driver of international cooperation and competition, shaping the global landscape in different and unexpected ways. We would like to see digital technologies as primarily a factor of opportunities, but they're also a factor of challenges, and we must maximize the benefit and minimize the harms. Now, maximizing benefits, minimizing the harms is one of the essential tasks of governance, and we shall be addressing this today in this meeting with the three panels that are planned to take place after this opening ceremony. We see the need for interdependence and the need to strengthen international cooperation between all, but primarily between democracies as the spaces in which artificial intelligence is developed most creatively and most quickly, and therefore requiring the most serious attention at the very present moment. We also would like to do it in a way that strengthens multilateral system as we build a common digital governance capable of ensuring an open, free and secure digital future for all. In this context, we believe that it is crucial to have a multi-stakeholder dialogue to ensure that this does not result in a fragmented landscape and missed opportunities for cooperation among democratic countries. For this reason, the Club de Madrid and Amazon Web Services joined forces, and this is a very welcome development, joining forces to carry out this meeting today on operationalizing artificial intelligence policies and innovation, moving from principles to practice. Now, today, of course, we shall be learning about the strategies of Spain and the European Union. We are very encouraged by the strong development that has been happening in Spain, and it is helping the European Union to develop a strong and global impact on the importance of artificial intelligence and digital information in general. We shall discuss the advantages of artificial intelligence adoption for economic growth and innovation, analyze the frameworks and models for regulatory policy for governing artificial intelligence, and how to build democratic, trustworthy, and accountable artificial intelligence. And we hope that this Artificial Intelligence Policy Day will allow us to not only openly discuss and learn, but also to generate ideas and recommendations to get the maximum benefit from the use of artificial intelligence, and as I said before, to minimize risks and harms. So I wish us all success in the coming sessions, and I thank you for your attention.
Tras esas palabras institucionales por parte.
Well, after the official opening remarks from the different stakeholders, we're going to enjoy two speeches in the promotion of use of artificial intelligence as a key driver for innovation, fostering sustainable, inclusive and growth. So let's receive Ezequiel García Collantes, the Deputy General Manager of Digital Transformation and Artificial Intelligence at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation. Thank you very much indeed. You have the floor, Ezequiel. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to try and be concise.
Spain as a reference in the promotion of artificial intelligence. AI has a main feature. It is fast changing. At the speed of light, it is implemented. And the question we need to ask ourselves is how can we become a flagship reference key point in the field of AI? It has been long discussed by my colleagues. Within the framework of artificial intelligence, there are many measures. And within those measures, in two levels, research. And these measures that seem obvious and we tend to forget to retrieve the talent that has migrated, the very valuable talent, to recover it so it can be promoting more research in Spain. And in the long run, such research needs to be focusing on artificial intelligence and many other aspects. We need to have an overarching view, gathering AI as a discipline and to combine it with other technologies like quantum computing. When you combine it with AI, new disciplines are created like quantum machine learning, which are completely different themes that can really accelerate quantum computing and neurotechnology. And when you apply machine learning, you can really engage in a revolution in the study of the different neurons of the brain. In the field of research, we need to talk about the next step. How can we ensure that AI is fully implemented in companies? The reality is that we are running late. We are running slow in the Spanish corporates. Spain is a country of a very strong industrial fabric of SMEs, and it is very difficult for these tiny, small SMEs to deploy AI. But this is accelerated thanks to companies like AWS. We therefore need to facilitate the access and the implementation of AI in companies' value chains throughout training, throughout assistance. This is feasible. It's been done already. And in that sense, we really need to go in the longer run. We have big challenges ahead in specific fields that we call vision from AI. We have challenges and the implementation of artificial intelligence in agriculture, health, climate change. These are the big challenges that go beyond SMEs. So having said that, one thing is the acceleration. We have talked about the acceleration of artificial intelligence. Another completely different thing is to do things well. Antonio and Celso mentioned it. We need to do it well, and it isn't easy. You've talked about the bias. There is a bias that is commonly known, gender bias, race bias. But the good news is that we have gained awareness. And we are also talking about micro bias that is focused and detected by AI. We must not forget that all the prejudices that human beings have are going to be inherited by AI, and it's going to be expanded. So we have the micro bias risks. We have cybersecurity threats, which are exponential and unknown in artificial intelligence. We need to progress there. There's work to be developed in the attack models. What is the application? Many of the current neuronal networks explanations are not easy. It isn't easy understood why they are taking the decisions. It's not that they are lying, but they are lying unwillingly. And this is a big, big problem, and we can say it out loud. Spain is a key reference in the European arena. We have set up this agency. We have created the sandbox with the intention to ensure the European regulation can be implemented easily and at a very cost-effective fashion, boosting innovation. The sandbox needs to help ensure this is cost-effective for companies. But most importantly, AI regulation, where Spain is at the forefront because we are soon opening the doors to the European Union's presidency. And, well, thank you very much indeed. After that deep dive to the Spanish reality, thank you very much, Ezequiel. Irina Vasiliou, a political analyst representing the European Commission in Spain, is going to talk to you about the EU perspective. Thank you very much indeed, Irina. Good afternoon. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to continue saying that we are references in the European Union. The way in which we approach artificial intelligence will ultimately define the world we will live in. Of everything we see, we need to be clear about this. And the EU's approach about artificial intelligence focuses on excellence and trust. The Vice President has clearly stated that trust is not a nice-to-have thing, but it is mandatory in the field of AI. And AI is not the end, the ultimate end, but it is a modality from the EU. We have put together a set of actions 2 years ago. We rolled out the EU regulation in the field of AI. And most importantly, to be mentioned by Ezequiel, the update in 2021 of the coordinated plan on the field of artificial intelligence with very simple objectives. We want, on the one hand, to guarantee trust, security, and the respect of fundamental rights of individuals, and on the other hand, to guarantee innovation and investment in all member states, boosting industrial capacity and research. How do we do so from a specific legal framework? The regulation we want to ensure is risk dependent. We have done so in other legislations and it worked. And we believe strongly that the regulation favors innovation because it focuses on the high risks for some systems, and it does favor and protect different national legislations. There are 3 ways to favor the adoption of AI: increasing consumers' trust, increasing legal certainty, and to standardize rules. And distinguished gentlemen in the Spanish Congress have said it. Legislation is essential in order to be prepared for the future and to only intervene when it's strictly necessary. For that, we need to design the legal framework in order to only act and intervene when it's strictly necessary, so it does not have any burden for the economic players, and with a light governance structure. To conclude, with new sandboxes or regulatory tools, they are extremely essential because of innovation within a structure of innovation under the supervision of the national competent authorities. We know that the Spanish Congress had presented their initiatives by December. Hopefully, their parliament will oversight their stance by July, and EU is going to give the whole support to the Spanish presidency of the European Union to progress in this line. But this is a very important regulatory framework, but also the accountability legislation that we have proposed, and a more global framework, the law on data governance, digital markets law, the law on cybersecurity and digital services, providing you with an infrastructure that ensures robust and artificial intelligence systems. And I'm going to finish with a few figures that speak for themselves about the paramount importance of AI. We are going to invest 1 billion euros every single year in AI in the Digital Europe and Digital Horizon projects. We also want to attract more than 20 billion euros at the European Union for a decade, and also in line with the resilience and recovery mechanisms. And in line with my predecessors, we have a strong focus to forge PPPs so that SMEs can also benefit and use ultimately AI by 2030. And at the end of the day, we go back to the very beginning of the presentation. What do we want? The European Union to be a reference and a key leader in the field of artificial intelligence. We know yet this is a very ambitious objective, but that can ensure a smooth transition towards a robust artificial intelligence deployment. Thank you very much indeed.
Bueno, con esos dos contextos tan
Having depicted such interesting context and that call on the European Union to be the leading example of regulation, we are now going to move on to the first plenary session. How can the European Union take advantage of AI adoption for economic growth and innovation? It would be chaired by Cristina Manzano, a member of Club de Madrid Executive Board. Cristina, you have the floor. Thank you very much indeed. And you're also a member of ES Global.
Buenas tardes, gracias por estar aquí.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to kindly invite the rest of my speakers to come on stage so we can engage in this interesting dialogue. While they come, allow me to just add a few words, remarks to what's been said before. I think you have already depicted the perfect framework to shed some light on the upcoming debates. And when you talked about micro bias, language is also, a bias. And it is interesting that Spain encouraged the use of technology, but also the possibility to speak Spanish, which is a language spoken by more than 500 million citizens around the world. As been recently discussed, AI is a result, the outcome of a lot of hours in research and development. And there has been a complete eruption in our lives, not only because of their application, but the debate. In the last few weeks and months, we have seen the eruption exponentially, not only in the technical fields and in the business field, but also at the deepest part of the society. Sadly, it seems that we tend to focus on the challenges more than the opportunities. Later on, we will talk about legislation, which worries us. Legislation, limits, boundaries, and ethics. But we would like to spend some time today, this afternoon, discussing the opportunities to benefit economic growth, innovation, improvement, and the excellent opportunities ahead of us in the European Union. For that, we have a first-in-class panel of experts. Esko Aho, a member of the Club of Madrid and former Prime Minister of Finland, and Gregor Strogling, the chair of the Council of Europe's Committee on Artificial Intelligence, Antonio Zimorra, the director of Digital Transformation and Enabling Technologies, Ametic, representing the digital industry in Spain, and last but not least, Sasha Rubel, Public Policy Lead, Artificial Intelligence, Machine Learning Europe, Middle East and Africa, Amazon Web Services. Welcome you all. And we would like to touch upon three fundamental aspects. What are the economic implications of the application of AI in your fields? What should be those strategic sectors that should be prioritized by governments? And what are the key industrial policy drivers that can help boost it? Well, the dynamics is as follows. I'm going to kindly ask you to start with a few opening remarks, and then this should be a dialogue between the members in this table. And if I see there's a few pending issues, I will pinch you with this. But ideally, this should be a conversation among you all. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over the floor to Gregor. Thank you very much indeed, Gregor.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. A wise poet once said, "Have no fear for atomic energy, because none of them is going to stop at a time." Every technological revolution throughout history has had a profound impact on civilizations. However, it was not the technology itself that caused disruptions in society, but how it was used. It was part of the even pre-human process of evolution and also affected our genetics, from our ability to process lactose to the increase of our cognitive capacities. At every turn of development, from fire, stone, metals, gunpowder, or information, it ultimately came down to survival of the fittest. AI is providing us with this experience at an unprecedented rate. The transformative potential of AI is undeniable. Increased productivity, efficiency, job creation, economic growth. Over the past 5 years, the estimated rate of AI implementation was about 40% per annum. It seems safe to assume that over the following months or even years, this will only increase. One of the questions is, however, to what extent is this rate of adoption aligned with our actual needs? And conversely, to what extent it is rather exploiting them to particularistic goals? Europe, for example, has specific sustainable development challenges, and in many, AI can be applied with particular effectiveness. Aging population, energy consumption, climate change, circular economy, transportation, education, workforce development, or the fragmented market with linguistic difficulties. The list is long, and AI tools have already shown effectiveness in addressing many related issues. However, our ability to scale them up sustainably depends on several issues which mirror the previously mentioned benefits. To mention just 3, alignment. One alignment is of private, public, and political priorities, and the second of set goals with our capabilities, that AI actually does what we want it to do. Second, job displacement and skill transformation, in addition to job creation. And third, distribution of benefits. Who will reap them? Which inequalities will inequalities increase, etc. So what are the solutions? To fully harness AI's potential and to minimize the negative consequences, we must be able to elaborate on what we want and need and how we can get there, not just what we don't want. A vital first step is funding and investment in R&D. Talent development is second. And building robust digital infrastructure is also the third. But the list can go on and on, but I will focus on one that I particularly consider most important and where I also come from, and that is a comprehensive regulatory framework to address ethical, legal, and safety concerns which are a priority to prevent further misalignment. AI adoption causes and raises concerns ranging from data privacy, algorithmic bias and obscurity at various levels, to unintended consequences, and also the eventual problem of science fiction popular runaway superhuman general AI, which might be misaligned with humanity's best interests. Numerous initiatives have developed over the past decade and aim to address this. Recommendations, guidelines, and self-regulatory instruments need to be applauded for paving the way, but they ultimately fall short in effectiveness as they need enforcement capacity. Often, regulatory involvement raises concerns about a negative effect on innovation and increased compliance and administrative burdens. I believe that this is an issue of cost-benefit analysis, and the outcome is clear. Conversely, many examples of tech regulation in past decades have shown enormous benefits for both the developers and society. Just an example, biotech. On many national levels, the imposition of more substantial limits is often sidelined by the priorities of unencumbered development and optimization to gain competitive advantage, not only among states, but sadly, also over its citizens. It is widely understood that international cooperation is required to prevent an over-competitive individualistic race to the bottom and to ensure interoperability. Globally, consensus for binding regulation is challenging due to competitive interests, which often turn a blind eye to long or even medium-term risks. But that's nothing new under the sun. Regionally, however, there is not only a possibility, but actual development at its advanced stage. Europe has been proactive in this regard, and we have just heard about the activities of the European Union and the European Commission. The AI Act aims to create a comprehensive legal framework for AI and primarily addresses the market with specific compliance obligations. At the same time, Council of Europe is developing an AI treaty which aims to address the state's responsibilities to ensure the development, design, and use of AI aligned with human rights, democracy, and rule of law standards, and focuses on principles and fundamental rights. The work of Council of Europe builds on the work done by CAHAI, which I chaired for a couple of years, and it has now transformed into CAI. We lost the moment. And we have an added value by broad participation by several non-member global powerhouses, such as United States, Canada, Israel, Japan, in the negotiations process. Non-member states can ratify international conventions, while EU regulations apply to members only. Many industry leaders and developers have recently signed an open letter calling for rapid regulatory solutions and interventions. Some elements of that call closely map with the findings and recommendations of CAHAI. Also, they add to the urgency for governments to take decisive action. Currently, there is very little regulation, which in a way is regulation itself. At the same time, we need to be attentive to simultaneous pressures for ineffective regulation, which could just as well cement the existing patterns rather than solve pressing issues. And to paraphrase that poet again, we should not fear AI as such. Instead, we should be concerned with our own capabilities, impulses, and capacity to adapt. We should not regulate technology itself. We should regulate its use, design, and development. By failing to appreciate the new reality and by not adapting to its challenges adequately and decisively, we may turn out to be not fit enough. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Gregor, por este repaso a
Thank you for this overview of the challenges to the regulation. And now we're going to listen to the challenges for the technological industry and the Spanish technological industry. Antonio, you have the floor. Thank you very much and good afternoon. Thank you to the organizers for inviting METEC to participate in this event. Dear experts, representatives, professionals on AI, welcome to all of you. I'm going to start by highlighting the importance for our government and our countries and for the European Union to use artificial intelligence. I'm going to ask you a question. What would have happened if this seminar had been organized last year? Would we be thinking about the same? Would we be giving the same importance to AI? I'm not saying that this is something new or that the public authorities or the industries haven't been working on this for a while, but I just wanted you to think about and reflect upon how the scenario has changed, how the societies, companies, our governments are aware. And in just a year, just to give you a short time period, you can see how the importance given to AI has changed so much. In a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, that view of AI has changed so much about the importance of AI. What's going to happen in 2 years' time? What's going to happen with those countries, organizations, or industries that have left aside and didn't get on the wagon of artificial intelligence? We all want to get on that wagon. We all want to participate. It is important, and all these measures that are being talked about here, for instance, the EU intentions are really, really good. But in our opinion, we have to train for a global race. For instance, just to give you an example, we make huge efforts, but private investment on AI in Europe is only a tenth of the funds used in the US or a fifth of what they invest in China. So it is important not to rest on our laurels. We shouldn't just think that we have done all the activities that we needed to do or that were in our reach, because otherwise we'll be once again away from that global competition. Europe only contributes to 3% of the companies that highlight that stand out in the industrial sector, such as unicorns. Unicorns only account for 3% in Europe. And in terms of AI, we have to do what we need to do and much more. I think these initiatives are very important and is to be praised, the role of the EU and of Spain taking on certain initiatives which are important. So it's great. For instance, that national agency for the oversight of AI. This is a clear example of something positive. And what to say about the pilot sandbox, because we'll talk a lot about the regulation on AI. This is something new globally. Artificial intelligence has been developed in different countries, and Europe are going to be the first ones to legislate it. So this ethics, this reliability, this professionalism that we are discussing is key. When I look at the amendments, 4,000 amendments has the national strategy on AI received. I'm sure they were needed, but maybe we should be careful, because the devil sometimes stays in the detail when looking at innovation European-wide. We have to legislate specific cases. For instance, we spoke before about those 4 levels of control that the artificial intelligence legislation has. A fourth of it of greater risk, where AI will be prohibited. It's important to see where it could be prohibited and why, and not prohibiting the technology itself, but only in certain specific contexts. And that's when we talk about the importance of artificial intelligence and the fact that Europe has to lead an important role. We want to win that global race. We should train hard, but make sure we remember that we have top-level competition outside. So let's make sure that we train for the race. We are AMETEC. We represent the industrial sector, the ones that provide those technologies that are part of the AI development. And AI, that, as I said before, has biases. Well, AI in itself doesn't have bias. It's the people behind it, the people that develop the AI, the ones that have certain biases. So just like any other member of society, they will have to improve and optimize. But let's not think that it is the technology that is negative. It's the people behind it sometimes. We are representatives of an industry that contributes importantly and significantly to our GDP. And not just that. We hope the other industries also grow. Just a while back, it was mentioned, a figure was mentioned. He said that from now till 2035, it's estimated that AI, specifically AI, could help double the growth of economies. Wow, that is massive. Increasing our GDP just by using technologies by 1% is huge. But if we can double the growth thanks to the use of a specific technology such as AI, that is something that it cannot go unused. So as representatives of AMETIC, which is the association of this type of industry in Spain, we are a network of associations in Europe as well, and we participate in the European society. Just a few figures to let you know what this sector represents in Spain, and consequently with a similar representativeness in Europe. In Spain, this sector has a turnover of about 120 billion euros. It has about 40,000 companies, 40,000 of different sizes, like in most of them SMEs, but we also have the industry that we need to support, the large players that we need to support in order to make sure that we're able to move forward artificial intelligence and this sector, and about 600 direct employments. And when I talk about 600,000, direct employments, when I talk about these 600,000 is the people who work in all those companies, people who work in other contexts, people who work in the petrochemical industry, in the automation industry, etc. So It's not just that we have to strengthen that industry and that we have to have that industry when developing the legislation and the initiatives that we are talking about. It's also the idea of knowing what's the role played by those technologies in our society and in the other sectors. In the context of that network of associations that we have in Europe, we have spoken about and we have made proposals for the legislative development on AI and all the legislation on data and on the use of technologies mentioned here. We have also spoken about the key role that our country will play, not just because of the legislation development, the sandbox and the agency, but because Spain is going to host the EU presidency in the second semester of 2023. And within that context, Spain has to become a leader so that the AI legislation includes certain initiatives that could foster its implementation. I mean, we have to face a difficult legislation. This will be a legislation that has never been dreamt of before. And this sandbox is a test area where companies and the legislators and policymakers will be in. So it's important that those initiatives are a coordinated effort between the industry, the government, and the experts. As associations of information technologies, we've made several proposals. We have written certain recommendations from the technological industries towards the EU, based on supporting four key proposals that will need to be taken into consideration when we talked about the final final draft of the legislation. We want to use sandboxes in order to test the impact, the potential impact of legislation on companies, and also to make sure that we help them be ready for the compliance of that legislation. This is something very new. A sandbox is something new, and Spain is taking the first step forward, and it's important if this is developed in all the EU countries, because we need a legislation that includes all member states. We don't need to have 28 different legislations. The second proposal by the industry is to clarify the responsibilities and accountability throughout the whole value chain of AI. Many of the responsibilities up to date make the developer accountable for the application in many users. And many times the provider of those services doesn't even know how the users are going to use it. So that responsibility and accountability needs to be distributed in the value chain. It also says that the AI sector has to guarantee the freedom of parties to allocate accountabilities. The third proposal by the industry is to guarantee the harmonization of the AI legislation with existing legislation. This is very important. Europe is a territory where fundamental rights, people's rights, are the key pillar in our legislative development. And it's very important that AI legislation is in line and coherent and consistent with the legislation that already exists. And the last proposal that we make from the industry is to allocate a contact point, a central contact point in each member state, with a good coordination mechanism to ensure that we can apply coherently that AI legislation. So, all in all, over the next few months, when in a year's time, 2 years' time, we have a session similar to this today, I'm sure the scenario we will be moving, the scenario on AI, will be totally different to what we have today. What we want to be is protagonists of that development. What's to come over the next 2-3 years? Just to give you a short period time frame, is important. We cannot be just observers of what others regions are doing. We should be leading that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for talking about the industry and the challenges in terms of the development or the joint development with other regions, etc. One of the characteristics of digital development and artificial intelligence from Europe is, well, we want to make sure that it's inclusive, based on people, and it promotes prosperity. So maybe Strajan can talk about it. Sorry, Sasha. I can't. I hope next time I'll be able to speak Spanish.
What you were saying, Christina, in terms of engagements with regards to digital development, and situate the conversation in the framework of a commitment that we've all signed on to as Europeans and European countries, which is the digital decade. And building on what Irina was talking about, the importance of framing the way in which we invest in digital technology based on the targets of the digital decade. So the digital decade of the European Commission really mapped out a bold path for the region to gain leadership in the global digital economy. And these targets, which are contained in the digital compass, cover 4 key areas. And I'm just going to build on what Antonio was saying, because I was very struck by the data that you shared, to share with you some of the data and the ambitious goals of this digital decade. So first of all, skills. That Europe will have 20 million ICT specialists with gender balance. At least 80% of European citizens will possess basic digital skills. Secure and sustainable digital infrastructure, which you talked about, Gregor, emphasizes the importance of having gigabit connectivity, and that it will be available to all, and 5G will be everywhere. Digital transformation of businesses, that 75% of EU companies will take advantage of the cloud, AI, and big data. That, Antonio, building on what you were saying, the number of EU unicorns will double, and more than 90% of European SMEs will reach a basic level of digital intensity. And then lastly, digitalization of public services. The goal is that 100% of key public services will be available online for citizens and for businesses. So these are very ambitious goals. They are right goals, they are right priorities, but meeting them will not happen automatically. And AI and ML and cloud computing will play a really important role in enabling transformation across these targets. And this is why AWS is here today, but also why we're working hand in hand with the Spanish government and governments in the EU, but also stakeholders from academia and civil society to make sure that we can meet those targets. So as many of the speakers before me mentioned, digital technology is really the driver of transformation in increasing our standard of living, in ensuring sustainability goals, and in making sure, and it's at the heart of AWS's mission, that power, and the transformative power specifically of AI ML, is in the hands of developers everywhere, so that we can democratize access to innovation. But this isn't something new. Since the 1980s, ICTs has been responsible for approximately a quarter of growth in advanced economies. And the 2020s are poised to bring even faster digital progress than we've seen over the last 30 years. These technologies, as I mentioned, are at the heart of the EU Digital Decade's ambitions, and then they'll enable us as Europeans and as governments to dramatically boost skills, to expand infrastructure, to transform business, and to modernize public services. But this transformation also comes with important economic implications. By successfully delivering on the digital decade, Europe could unlock, and I don't even know how to count this high, so it's hard for me to pronounce, 2.8 trillion in economic value, according to a report released by Public First. But accelerating progress for these goals requires collective action, and this is why we're happy to be sitting here today with all of you. Europe isn't at the same level of progress in some areas. They're on track to double the amount of unicorns by 2030, but currently, only 26% of European companies are using cloud computing, 25% are using AI, and 14% are using big data. At this pace, the EU would not meet the target of 75% of companies adopting the cloud until 2040. And digital skills, we see, are absolutely essential to the vast majority of businesses, and to make sure that these businesses can harness the opportunity for digital transformation. But more than 70% of European businesses today say that the lack of staff with adequate digital skills is an obstacle for them investing in AI, in the cloud, and in big data. So Gregor, couldn't agree with you more on your emphasis on the importance of this reskilling and upskilling. We need 20 million ICT specialists by 2030, and at current growth rates, we're going to fall short. Another point of data, unless progress is accelerated, the EU will only achieve 45% of the potential economic value of the digital decade. 45%, meaning the region could miss out on 1.5 trillion in economic value. And Antonio, again, really appreciated the data points that you shared, situating that in terms of what that means for Spain's development as well. So why AI in all of this? What is the role of AI and why should we care? AI is one of the most transformative technologies of our time. I'm sure when you open up your newspaper every day, if not on the first page, on the second page, is questions not only about generative AI, but also the great work that Carlos Romero is doing in Brussels to facilitate conversations soon as EU presidency around how can we ensure practical application of this technology while effectively regulating their risks. And this is at the top of mind of policymakers, and it's also at the top of mind of citizens. At the current rate of AI/ML technology adoption around the world, AI/ML can deliver economic activity of around $13 trillion globally by 2030. But we need to go all in. And part of the challenge is skills, and the other challenge is really not wading in the water, but swimming in it. We've found through research that only when firms increase their intensity of AI adoption to at least 25%, meaning that they're using a quarter of the AI tools currently available to them, do growth rates pick up and investments in AI start to pay off. And we see this in Spain. We're lucky, and my wonderful colleague Antonio and David and Marta are leading this work in supporting a lot of the startups in Spain to transform their businesses using AI. So Iberdrola in the field of energy, or WebBed in the field of customer service, or the Cantabrian Health Service, or Santander are using AI/ML in order to transform the way we work in finance, in health, in energy, and others. And COVID has really accelerated this growth, and I'm happy that wonderful researcher Mark is here today, and I hope we'll be able to talk with him more, where he showed that, for example, linked to COVID, there was a huge jump in AI adoption in Canada specifically from 4% in 2021 to 28% in 2022. This is not leapfrogging, this is going to the moon. And so we see here the incredible impact that this kind of adoption has on the GDP. And Spain recognizes this, and this is something that has been mentioned on multiple occasions today already in the work that you're leading, not only in the framework of your national AI strategy, but also the work that you're doing in the framework of the Sandbox and supporting the Transparency Center in Seville. But at the same time, there's a lot of questions of public trust, and this is again something that many of the speakers here today have evoked. There is opportunities and there are also risks, and I love, Gregor, what you said earlier, that it's not about regulating the technology, it's about regulating how it's used. And we at AWS are supportive of this risk-based approach to AI regulation that regulates the specific use case, but that also allows for the practical implication of technology. And there's an interesting report that came out, which we had nothing to do with, but I wish we had, interviewing SMEs and startups from across Europe about what the potential impact of the EU AI Act may be on innovation. And there are 50% of AI startups that believe that the AI Act in its current form may slow down innovation in the EU, and 16% are considering stopping AI development or moving outside the EU if the clarification of responsibilities, like Antonio mentioned, are not clarified. And this is something that I think is at the front of mind when we talk to customers, which is that our customers want to understand when and how and why to comply. And we are all supportive of this risk-based approach to regulation that protects fundamental rights and freedoms while also allows for us to harness the transformative power of this technology. And I'll close just by evoking a couple of elements in terms of what are the barriers to AI adoption, and also what are the opportunities. And again, Gregor, love not only that you cited Bob Marley in the opening of your statement, but also that you mentioned the question of skills. And this is really one of the big barriers that we see for AI adoption, is lack of skills. And I mentioned the statistic earlier of 70%. The second is a lack of knowledge of what AI is and what AI can and can't do. And this is, again, linked to an understanding of the technology. And the third is the question of cost. What does it cost to have access to this kind of technology? And again, this is where the role of the cloud plays a very important role, not only reducing the carbon footprint of innovation, but also allowing access to these kinds of technology. But what are the opportunities? The opportunities are large, and one of the things that we place an emphasis on is the question of economic opportunities. So as tools using AI advances, they could drive almost a 7% increase in global GDP and lift productivity growth by 1.5% over a 10-year period. The other element is the question of the labor market. There's a lot of fear around the idea that AI could take your job. AI is not going to take your job. AI is going to transform it. And this is something that we have seen historically in terms of what AI does to the labor market. A recent study, which I love, by David Ator, found that 60% of today's workers are employed in occupations that didn't exist in 1940. So this implies that 85% of employment growth over the last 80 years is explained by the technology-driven creation of new positions. So this is an amazing opportunity for the inventions of jobs that our children and our children's children will have that we can't even imagine. I was talking the other day with AI expert Marco Grobelnik, and he was saying prompt engineer for prompting generative AI will be a huge job, and that we need to start training and educating our children and our children's children and our parents on what this technology means. And then lastly, I'll close in education, is that what this technology represents is an opportunity to rethink how we think about investing in skills. And the top priority for governments, which is reflected in the national AI strategy of Spain and also across the board in EU countries, is the question of investing in education to train generations and also workers who are already in place to be able to engage with these kinds of technologies so that we can collectively harness the opportunities of this technology for good and adopt it jointly together to meet those targets of the digital decade in Spain and beyond.
Muchas gracias, Sasha. Precisamente el sector de la educación.
Indeed, Sasha, the education sector has been a revolution because we don't know yet what are going to be the boundaries and the roles, responsibilities of teachers, professors, and students. Now, ESCO is going to shed some light on the transformation from physical to digital and how in Europe we can get the most out of it. Thank you, ESCO.
Thank you so much. First of all, when trying to analyze or frame the path to this phase of technological revolution, I think there is a good reason to look back. How good we have been in predicting technological development. I'm old enough to remember when moon landing module Eagle landed 1969. Do you remember what kind of computing capacity that moon landing module had? It was world-class computer that guided the moon landing module to the moon. And if somebody predicted 1969 that in practice every single citizen in the world has in his or her pocket the same level of computing capacity, if not more, that kind of story had been neglected completely. But that is truth today. No one was able to predict that. Or second phase that happened quite soon after that, there is the Club of Rome, not only the Club of Madrid, but the Club of Rome, which predicted 1972 what is going to happen in the global economy and global technology in the future. And one part of their prediction was that Chinese and Indians will never be able to be integrated into the global telecommunication network. Do you know why? They estimated that there is not enough copper in the world. Why today's Indians and Chinese have been connected? Because of technological revolution. Mobile technology made it possible that Nokia's dream, connecting people, became truth very, very rapidly. So when looking back, I think it's very important to understand that technological change is very difficult to be predicted, but it has huge impact in everything what we do. But when we are analyzing technologies, I think it's very important as well to understand what kind of technologies we do have. There is a distinction between ordinary technologies and so-called general purpose technologies, GPTs. Artificial intelligence is an example of general purpose technologies. Railways, electricity, computers, mobile phones are good examples of general purpose technologies. The idea is that technology itself is not that important. Who is able to remember any American railway companies? Name any of them. There were 5,000 railway companies in the United States in the 19th century. Maybe 5 of them were profitable ever. But it was revolutionary technology, not because of railway business itself, but because of consequences railway business had in agriculture, food processing, steel manufacturing, oil production, oil sector, everything what we do. That's why these GPTs are so important. Their secondary impact is huge. And that's why when we are looking at artificial intelligence, we have to understand that it's not only important what kind of investments are made in the technology itself, not even how much we are able to innovate on the basis of that, but we have to understand that implementation is going to be the most critical. So I'd like to divide this development into 3 phases: invention phase, innovation phase, and implementation phase. Now I'm coming to Europe. Europe has lost this first completely. We have not been able to invest in R&D and basic technologies in a way like the Americans and Chinese have done. R&D spending, in spite of the fact that we have put a lot of money into AI technologies, we are lagging behind in a massive way. And we are never able to catch up Americans and Chinese. That game has been lost. Second phase is going on, and that is innovation game, when applications are made. And we are losing in that game as well. Chinese are very good in that. I'm not sure if they are as good as Americans, but they are very close to par. But Europeans are lagging behind again. So what to do now? To try to increase our investment in innovations in that sector, I'm afraid that we are not able to survive with that kind of effort. We have to invest in doing the third phase, or putting investments in third phase, to implement these applications in a massive way. And that is another story. It's not about how much we are spending in R&D. It's not about how much specialists we have in different companies. But it is very much about what kind of business environment we are able to create. I mean business environment also, what kind of public sector atmosphere we do have. And I'd like to, most of those efforts we have to do have been already mentioned, but I'd like to put them into certain context. That game is going to be ecosystem game. It's not about one individual effort to be done, but it's about who is able to create the best environment to do that. I was working for Nokia. I was in the executive board of Nokia, unfortunately close to the end of the success story of Nokia in the mobile phones. But how come it was possible that that Europe was leading mobile phone technologies. And how come companies coming from Finland and Sweden, Nokia and Ericsson, were the big stars in Europe? Not because of the size of the market, not because of investment made, but because of the fact that we were able to create the best ecosystem for mobile technologies in Europe and especially in Finland and Sweden. So what does it mean to create an ecosystem for AI in today's world in order to get applications made in all sectors, traditional industrial sectors, in public sector, in everything what you do? For the first, we need excellent, high-quality digital infrastructure. Spain and Italy, for example, Italy is lagging behind in digital infrastructure in a massive way. Now they have money. Why not to spend that money in digital infrastructure? Because that is a good investment for the future. We should look at that aspect in every single corner of Europe and to understand that now it's time to put that infrastructure in order. Secondly, education has been mentioned several times. What is the difference between American strategy, Chinese strategy, and European strategy? I think we have one asset here in Europe. We are able not only to give good skills and talents for 50% of students, but we are trying to get education for all. And I think this is an asset because artificial intelligence is leading to a society which is completely digital. And it's not enough that 50% or 75% of population have those skills and talents needed. Everyone needs them. And that's why education system has to be organized in a way that it is not only able to create best and high quality skills, but ordinary citizens are getting capacities as well. Then for the third, and this is critical for Europe, access to the market. We have been able to create common market, single market, thanks to Jacques Delors and his ideas late 1980s. But we still are missing digital single market in Europe. And we need it urgently, because AI applications cannot be taken into the use without that element. That is what Europeans and European decision makers have to do rapidly. Digital single market is critical for the future of Europe. For the fourth, we need risk-taking capacity. It doesn't mean that we need for sure financial investments as well. Companies have to invest in new applications. Public sector has to invest in AI applications as well. But it's also a mental issue. In the public sector, we have to accept risk-taking and failure. If you don't accept risk-taking and failure, how come you can transform your system? And that level of failure acceptance is very, very low in Europe. And the European Union is sometimes the worst case in this. They want to create systems which beforehand are predicting that nothing goes wrong. If you do things like that, there is not going to be any innovation. How come without risk you can change the existing system? For the fifth, you need business, government, and academia collaboration. That was already mentioned here. I think that is an area, again, where Europe has potential. In America, governmental institutions are weak. They are not able to create real capacity to work with private sector. Private sector is leading. In China, government is too strong. It's controlling everything. We have a potential to create real public-private sector collaboration. And finally, the word trust. Russians are saying, trust is good, but control is better. Trust is in the AI-based systems extremely critical. And trust is closely linked to my final point on the list. We need regulation, but it has to be smart regulation. smart regulation which is combined with trust. We cannot regulate everything. We have to regulate, like probably you said, that we cannot regulate technology. We can regulate only the use of technology. But in the same time, we have to understand that without trust, that regulation is not going to work properly. My final comment is why Europe should do this, what the benefits will be. For the first, I think we can move to a totally different type of society and economy, which is based on not on standardized, but on personalized solutions and services. And think about healthcare or education. For example, in education, when we went to school, there was no alternative but to compare our performance with our class. But now we have capacity to individualize education completely. And the right method is to compare to your background. Are you able to improve? How much you are able to improve? And when you are reaching that, you don't have to care if somebody is a bit better than some others. It doesn't matter. And we have to understand as well that this is the method how we can get diversity to be exploited in a best possible way. The same with healthcare. We have a huge potential to personalize healthcare even more than what we have done today. So we can get huge benefits in different sectors, traditional sectors in Europe, and that is one reason. Second reason is that this is going to increase productivity. And if you look at the economic growth, there are only 3 ways to get economic growth. More labor force, better exchange rate in the global trade, or for the third, higher productivity. And I think Europe has only one option left, and that is higher productivity. And AI, if I understand correct, has huge potential to increase productivity. And finally, I will mention a couple of words about one aspect which is quite often forgotten when we speak about Europe's economy and global economy as well. Aging of population. Demographic challenges are huge in every corner of the world. AI is going to kill jobs, but it's welcomed because we need that. We don't have potential to survive with this demographic trend without higher productivity and capacity to use our labor force in a better way. Look at China. If the present trend is going to be continued, China's working age population, which is today 910 million, will be 650 million by 2050. Radical changes are going to happen. And again, AI is enabler. And that's why we have to be fast enough to take benefit from that. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias por las 4 exposiciones.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to just open a Q&A session now. I'm going to name some of you in particular, but if you want to build on your colleagues' comment, well, I would like to begin by Sasha. 20 million job forces and people we need to train with the sufficient capacities in that Europe that intends to be inclusive. They need to continue investing and training on the STEM and to be gender balanced. Only 34% of the graduate students at European universities are women. How can we do that?
Perdón, y ahí también, Antonio, desde el punto de vista de la industria, si podéis comentar, sería estupendo.
It would be great to know also the industry's perspective.
The question of gender equality and diversity is at the heart of my personal convictions and also at the heart of the work that we're doing at AWS to ensure inclusivity in this field. Maybe just to give you a little bit of an overview of what we're doing in the field of skills, we made a commitment to provide free cloud computing skills training to 29 million people by 2025. Since 2020, we've delivered on this commitment and helped over 7 million people across 200 countries and territories gain cloud skills. Included in those skills are skills related to AI, ML, and digital transformation. In Europe, we've trained more than 700,000 individuals since 2017. In those individuals, one of the things that we're particularly committed to is making sure that we're empowering young women. And here I would say it's not even just a question of gender equality, because diversity, equity, and inclusion goes beyond the question of gender equality, but looking at how to make sure that AI future workforces are inclusive through programs like Get IT, which encourages more young students, and particularly girls, to be part of the digital skills ecosystem. Amazon Future Engineer, which helps young people from low-income backgrounds to build computer science careers, or AWS Restart, which also looks at local in-person reskilling programs. And I love, Esko, what you said in terms of the aging population. I would just add there that the question is not only, as I mentioned earlier, about training young people, but it's also about training older people. And one of the things that we're looking at also at AWS is how to pair up, for example, digitally literate young people with older people to make sure that there's an exchange of knowledge that happens there. Otherwise, the older generation will also be left out, for example, in making doctor's appointments or in having telemedicine conferences and taking advantage of that kind of technology. I just want to close in terms of that specific question to say that failure to close the digital skills gap will inhibit innovation in Europe and block progress for the digital decade targets that I was talking about before. But also, again, just as an interesting data point, in 2020, the World Economic Forum reported that 97 million new roles in technology would emerge by 2025, directly linked to digitization. So the question of investing in skills and investing in diversity of those that can participate in the digital economy of tomorrow is not a question that can be put in parentheses. It's a question that needs to be addressed today, and we're working at AWS with our civil society partners, with academic counterparts, and with private sector and startups to make sure that this becomes a reality.
Antonio, no sé si querías añadir algo, pero...
Did you want to say anything, Antonio? Well, it's difficult to add anything. I would just like to say that in terms of those needs for human capital and digital talent, this is a recurrent problem and a growing problem. It's something that we've identified for many years. But instead of shortening the gap between the supply and demand, what we see is that, in fact, the gap is getting greater. The gender gap in terms of talent is very important, and the collaboration initiatives between the industry and the public institutions and education system are a necessity. It's also true that many of the proposals that we're discussing here, legislation, etc., it's important to have that collaboration. But in this case, the role of institutions and the role of governments and of academic institutions is even more important. So we need to work on awareness policies, very much focused on the younger generations, people who are looking for specific profession. And obviously we need to think about what we'll need to continue updating in the future. Contrary to other cases here, there's no wagons at the front or at the back. This is a global problem. The lack of these people or these skills exist everywhere, including those that are more developed. So it's a very global problem.
I think that gender equality issue is one of those legacies we have, so that earlier in the industrial age, roles of men and women was organized in a special way, and now we are living in totally different kind of environment, but these legacies are changing quite fast. What I'm actually also worried about is that our education system doesn't recognize that when we want to have equality, we have to understand also that boys are majoring later than girls. And if we try to have a standardized teaching and education, it means that we have a lot of dropouts among boys now. And we have seen that already. And that's why I think it's urgent not only to look at gender equality, but in the same time look at this education system, how to personalize education as fast as possible in order to guarantee that those dropout figures in Europe could be and should be smaller. And finally, about senior citizens, I'm retired, but I don't like the word retirement. It means that you have been tired and now you have retired. So I think we have to understand that there is not any more standardized retirement age. To be honest, from Finland, when looking from Finland, that struggle in France looked very crazy, totally crazy. Some people are able to work 70 in the age of 70, 75. Some people are not. And we have to accept again the same, that we do have personalized systems. And that's why we have to get rid of that legacy as well.
Muchas gracias. Quiero recordar, mencionaba Sasha la cuestión de...
Sasha spoke about the elderly people and the healthcare issues. Not that long ago in Spain, we spoke about that also with the banking sector, because the people, all elderly people, were not able to access the bank digitally. And I'll give the floor to Gregor about regulatory aspects. You said how at the Council of Europe, you've also had the collaboration and conversations with other key players, such as the US and China. And before we spoke about the need to have a smart regulation, I would like to know if it's possible to combine. And this is a global issue, okay? So this is not just, we're talking here about Europe mainly, but it's a global issue. How can we move forward? President Tusk spoke about the need for multilateralism, to have a minimum consensus for the basis of that regulation, at least, with the other key players. What would you think about that?
Sé que no es una pregunta fácil. I know
It's not an easy question.
But an attempt, please.
They used to say it's a 1 million question, now it's a 10 billion question because of the growth in prices. I don't know the answer, but I'm hoping that we're working in the right direction. There is the geopolitical interest for new alliances, and that plays a role. But in the long run, it is going to come down to ourselves to organize and pull ourselves up. And I like the idea voiced by President Aho about the ecosystem that we are creating. And it goes well in hand with what I said, that we need to decide what we want and then focus on that. And I don't think we should satisfy ourselves with the minimum. We should be more ambitious, because otherwise, if we go for the minimum, we actually encourage various defensive mechanisms that are in place within governments. So I cannot comment directly on the negotiating process that is happening at the Council of Europe because it is confidential. But it is, in a way, being pulled along with the simultaneous process of the European Union. And I think the European approach is comprehensive in terms of its goals. But it's going to take a lot of operational work on the ground by both national governments and also national companies, not only those who are traditionally involved in these international collaborations, mainly researchers, universities, etc., to understand what's there for them. And education is something that can be prepared and implemented, the programs can be prepared and implemented, prepared on a central level and implemented in a distributed fashion. And I think this is where we should start next to those ambitious goals of the politics, because we know with the politics, and we're sitting in a house that is dedicated to this, but I think it was Bismarck who said it best: you don't want to know how the sausages are made. But in the long run, we will depend on the knowledge that our children have. We have to look at it in the long run.
Pues muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you all so much. I'm really sorry we have to leave it here, but now we have a session on legislation that I'm sure will help us understand these topics. Thank you very much to the four of you.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos los ponentes de esta mesa, a Cristina.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you, Cristina, for sharing your knowledge with us and for that call to trust and dialogue between different parties that we hope Club de Madrid will be able to contribute through events like today's. And now we go to the second session of the day. Please, if the speakers could come to the table. The panel is entitled Frameworks and Regulatory Policy Models in order for governments to regulate artificial intelligence. We have Carlos Romero, the Regional Minister of Digital Transformation in the permanent representative of Spain in the EU. Thank you very much, Carlos, for being here. We're all ears. We'll give you a minute whilst you take your seats. Thank you.
Bueno, pues buenas tardes a todos. Voy a intentar ser breve para intentar.
I'm going to try and be brief. People who go into competitions, we need to keep a balance in the time, and I'm going to try and make sure that our panelists stick to the time that was given to them. In the end, AI is a reality, and this is a reality that's very promising, but also has certain risks. And that's why the discussion started on the legislation of AI and legislative frameworks or models or different things that needed to be legislated. And that's what we will discuss in this over the next hour. Without a doubt, the EU has taken momentum with the presentation of the legislation on AI, the first legislation ever in the world about AI, something that could be actually applied and implemented. But there are other geographies, other territories that are also thinking about this roadmap. And recently, for instance, the EU approved a white paper last month, and this same week we found out that the US and China, and maybe because of the accumulation that we mentioned before, that were mentioned by Mr. Zimorra, we are seeing an addition of news, and they were also thinking about legislating artificial intelligence. We have a fantastic panel with us, made up of people who know, they know much more than I do about this. We have Jorge Quiroga, member of Club de Madrid, former president of Bolivia from 2001 to 2002, Irene Blázquez, manager of the Center for the Governance of Change of the AI University. She studied with me for 5 years during my degree. Cameron Carey, professor from the Brookings Institute and Secretary of State, acting Secretary of State. Carlos Santiso, head of the Department of Digital Government and Innovation at the OECD, and Matt Etienne Dumet, from Global Director of Policy of AI in Amazon Web Services. I'm going to ask the panelists to be strict with the time that has been given to them. 5 minutes for their initial presentation, please. And based on a specific topic, I'm going to ask Mr. Carey to talk about standards, also Marc Etienne, Irene, and Carlos about governance, governance models, how to legislate or whether to legislate, and Carlos Santiso, governance from an EU perspective and the use of artificial intelligence. And Mr. Quiroga, I'm going to ask you about the need to bring together different legislative frameworks in the world. I think that's quite complicated, and his Latin American perspective will be of great importance to us. Professor Carey, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Me siento
Many thanks. It is an honor for me to be here with the distinguished members of Club de Madrid and with all of you.
to English. And I want to say a little bit from a personal note, because much of the concerns about human rights, about international cooperation, about democratic governance are things that I feel very deeply as a matter of upbringing. I grew up for much of my childhood in post-war Europe as the child of a diplomat who was stationed here, and came as the age of 4 years old to a Berlin that was then an occupied city, still with bombed out, burned and shot up buildings. And many of my relatives are in Europe. My mother was from an American family that came to Europe early in the 20th century, and many of her siblings stayed there. And she, in fact, was born in Paris. She was among the hordes of refugees who left the city as the Nazis were coming to Paris. And I learned not many years ago that a great aunt and great uncle were transported to the Theresian concentration camp, and one died there, another at Treblinka. So the needs for international cooperation and transatlantic cooperation are, a central part of the work that I do at Brookings as part of, with a project that I co-lead alongside the Center for European Policy Studies in Brussels, the Forum for Cooperation on AI. It's something we started over 3 years ago to avoid some of the divergence that I've seen and worked with and experienced in the area of data protection. And as well with the knowledge that I could see emerging the risks in the EU AI Act of similar divergence, but that we have many common principles. And as well that AI is because of its scale, because of the data, because of the compute resources and other resources is involved, is uniquely collaborative across borders. That is the norm in scientific research and development today. It is even more true in AI. So no one country can deal with this global issue alone. No one region, whether it's the EU, the United States, or China, we need to work together. And we have convened a number of leading governments, the United States, the European Union, the UK, Canada, as well as Japan, Australia, and Singapore, to learn from each other, from experts, to explore issues in AI, and developed in 2021 a sort of series of preliminary recommendations to try to harmonize, avoid divergence, focused on really 4 areas. One is on regulatory alignment, and particularly when it comes to risk. As Prime Minister outlined, there are, the EU has its approach to risk, but the U.S. and National Institute of Standards of Science and Technology has also done work on a risk management framework. And that and definitions of AI, which really define the scope of regulatory approaches. Another significant area is on standards. Standards really provide so much of the infrastructure. And this device is enabled, and the communications and many other features are enabled by technical standards. Those support the infrastructure and also can apply on software management, risk management. I spoke at the Trade and Technology Council meeting between the U.S. and the EU last December. And Commissioner, Vice President Vestager and I made the same point that the U.S. And the EU have different approaches when it comes to regulation and to legislation. One is more iterative, one more a priori, but both rely on standards, and that standards development can provide a bridge between those differences. The other areas of our recommendations were on joint research and development to really try to solve the problems in use cases that can benefit humanity. So particularly on joint research and development, on global climate change, monitoring and management, and on privacy-enhancing technologies, which can solve some of the problems of security and privacy while providing access to data. And we've seen those approaches reflected in the US-EU Trade and Technology Council. I think those need to be broadened to the G7 and to other forums. And the other area that a general area of joint cooperative work is on trade agreements, incorporating provisions relating to AI into the digital chapters of trade agreements. So to answer the question that is posed, I think, for this panel, what are the best opportunities for interoperability among regulatory systems? My answers would be, number one, on standards development and working particularly through international standards development organizations like ISO, like the IEEE, which in 2017 developed an ethical framework for AI, really before many governments started to talk about it. The second would be the alignment on risk. And then the joint research and development and trade agreements. But, with these, I think we have profitable ways to avoid divergence, despite differing legal systems. So I will leave it there and look forward to other contributions.
Irene, venga, modelos regulatorios.
Irene, you can walk through the regulatory models, right? Well, models, that's too much to say. Well, I would like to begin by thanking you for your kind invitation. I'd like to thank the organizers and the Senate for hosting such an interesting event today. These are paramount sessions. I couldn't agree more. The chair and I have studied together. I haven't gone through the path of the civil servant's career, but I'm going to present by sharing a reflection. I believe this debate and the discussion that's hot of the press in the last few months really questions Soraya Maras, the chairman of the Institute for the Future, pursuant to which we tend to predict the effect of our technology in the short run, but it is undervalued in the medium to long run. And I must say, this is not the case with this transformational artificial intelligence, as my predecessor, Sasha, said, because there is growing awareness about the capabilities and the unlimited potential of artificial intelligence. There is also awareness, however, on the different challenges facing legislators, regulators, who are facing two kinds of challenge. So is it meaningful for legislators to regulate this constant change that is embedded in artificial intelligence? And we have talked about weighting what regulators shall govern, and what shall they govern and regulate, as my colleague Cameron Kerry said. So how to juggle between innovation, security, trust. This is a cumbersome challenge in the political field, but it's also a social challenge. The ongoing debate is to what extent an unlawful use of artificial intelligence may pose an existential risk threatening society and humankind the way we know it today. It could be the case if we progress towards closer AI with no human interaction and with ChatGPT, or, these are, grief challenges, because there isn't any adequate governance, global, effective, adequate governance for minimum levels. And Antonio Vargas talked about an interoperated governance. There is no, or at least in this emerging field, as it happened with climate change, there is no global governance. We have not reached consensus. There is no harmonization here, no standardization, which is worrisome when we see that AI is changing and could potentially change governance structures, the way we exercise our rights. So we really have a strong dilemma. How can we protect and oversight democratic regimes if we want to ensure the lasting exercise of democracies, ensuring prosperity and respecting individual rights? I'm almost up, time's up. But this is just the beginning of my presentation. Allow me to give you, at a glance, a description, and this was mentioned by my colleagues in the previous panel, but I would like to refer to the current global regulatory environment in order to frame it and to draw some conclusions, interpretations, and understandings of that global governance, very much in line with what President Esco mentioned before about a healthy ecosystem in order to have prosperous AI governance. Well, obviously, I believe AI is going to be defined globally, of course. As Mr. Kerry said it, Professor Kerry said, this is a global challenge, this is a global dilemma, and for that we need global answers, regardless of the fact that regulation may differ in the different geographies. Now, as to the regulatory framework, there is an ongoing trend that international organizations can act as agencies. But this regulatory policy has done so in the development of some existing things. There's been few new novelty initiatives. So there's a strong dichotomy. There are new technologies because of the specific needs. However, we have tended to apply existing regulatory frameworks. And we will see this with the exception of some specific initiatives. So these initiatives fostered by the states, but in the framework of an existing legislation, so the initiatives in the field of the G20 or G7, and also at the member of the Council of Europe. These are interesting forums because what we have seen in the field of governance is a cross-fertilization, certain standards, or perhaps certain rules, principles, which are adopted in some forums, end up being permeated in other areas. Same happens with other initiatives led by non-state actors. Within the initiatives led by states, which are, really not within this framework, we need to mention the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. This is a joint initiative launched in 2017 between France and Canada that really has grown in the umbrella of the OECD. This is a very ample initiative with strong regulatory approaches, and I believe there's a specific speech later on about standards. So we can think about, the United Nations, the paradigm that should instill some basic regulation, some basic minimum rights, and a little bit of progress has been done since the high-level panel or the special envoy appointed by the Secretary General of the United Nations. But within the organization, governance is also way, way too fragmented. Remember the recommendations of the artificial intelligence by the Spanish government. Now, from the European Union, we are going to talk about the biggest reference. This regulation, this act is very stringent. Is as opposed to these recommendations or the standards, which are, pure recommendations, which are considered as the soft rights, whereas the European Union imposes some regulation that can have similar effects to the data protection law, the GDPR, and therefore there will be more legal issues in the different jurisdictions. Now, apart from these initiatives, the OECD needs to be named because they have deployed their first set of intergovernment principles in this matter, and the international subsidies for standardization that have played an outstanding role. What are, therefore, the readings within this panorama led by international organizations, states, and other non-state agents? What can we extract from this? Apart from that dichotomy, as mentioned by our colleagues, the new regulation of new things, but within the existing frameworks, there is disparity of regulation because I've discussed all these new standards. As soon as they get entrained with technicalities or AI, or perhaps they have a really basic principle. So we have talked about a holistic approach in the past, and it is very difficult to find an intermediate point in these two spaces. It is also heavily fragmented nationally and internationally. The regulation is growing. There is a strong proliferation of international approaches. It is a soft kind of regulation, and there has been a process of cross-fertilization standards from that travel from one geography to another. AI is a field where there must be, or there could be, self-contained regimes of international right its own regime with its own understood rules by the international players, that therefore has a supervisory system that ensures full oversight of compliance, which is usually shared by the rule of law. I will just leave it here. Sorry, I went beyond these 5 minutes. I beg you for mercy, distinguished chair. But we must not forget that digital transformation is a political thing. It has been stressed in numerous occasions. Here we have an ongoing debate on the table. Everything we regulate has to do with the way we exercise those rights and those liberties, how this is protected by the different states and organizations. Therefore, we need a new ecosystem. We need to set up new regulation, organic regulation. We have talked about, public-private partnerships, but not only in the field of entrepreneurship. When we talk about companies, it seems the whole entrepreneurial ecosystem is, included, but also startups and SMEs. And we need to boost new reinforced research. There must be certification of standards and all the missing aspects. Well, geopolitics, cybersecurity is to be discussed in the next panel. Thank you very much indeed. How interesting this academic presentation from the international public law. Well, indeed, very interesting. Carlos, governance, artificial intelligence with an adequate, improved governance. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Carlos. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank the Club de Madrid and the Spanish Senate for this kind invitation, and AWS as well, of course. I've seen the strong leadership from Spain in these aspects, from a humanistic approach. It is a person-centered discussion of artificial intelligence, but it is even more ample than that. It really discusses digital rights, and I see the inspiration of the Spanish chapter on digital rights and the recent deployment of the Charter of Digital Rights in Latin America. For the OECD, this is a privilege. We have a strong partnership with Spain in this regard. Spain is a strategic partner of the OECD in order to boost this view of human rights and digital transformation. And recently in the OECD meeting on digital economy that took place in the Canary Islands, that witnesses the strong partnership that we forged with the Spanish government and the Spanish state. And I would like to give here another angle, another approach. Not so much from the regulator's point of view of artificial intelligence, but users, from the user's perspective, and the responsibilities this entails, plus the challenges this also entails. So in line with other words and reflections from the president from Finland, Mr. Aho, some of the challenges facing humankind with artificial intelligence. First of all, when we talk about AI in the public sector, we are just at the very early stage. Here we do believe we have an outstanding challenge, a really cumbersome one, yet with numerous opportunities as well. Most countries are currently adopting, using AI in their public administrations. That has to do with reaching a perfect balance between risks. We are all talking about risks, yet with potential benefits from these technologies, as we have seen during the pandemic. This is a very delicate balance, even more for public administrations and governance, because they have a duty of care which is rather different. Yet the opportunities are tremendous in terms of improving the efficiency of public administrations, improving the delivery of public services to citizens based on their needs, as well as the opportunities to improve public policies, and that in a field where we have seen a strong acceleration, digital transformation in the public administrations and public services, and also data policies, open data policies, data infrastructure, and even, as you can see here, there are huge opportunities that shall be grasped, and there are, many countries, not only the countries here, but also if we take a look at Latin America, most countries are adopting artificial intelligence strategies. But in the public sector, it is a bit more difficult to go beyond those pilot tests and to dwell on the benefits that AI will have. We've seen this during the pandemic, the powerful tools that arose, but the digital infrastructure that is needed was not always there. But in the public sector, this is not like the private sector. There is a monopoly, and the state is the only user, the only manager behind these technologies. Secondly, well, the duty of care, that need to introduce specific safeguards, the use of the digital economy of artificial intelligence. And we need to see that most countries that have embodied in an early stage artificial intelligence, like Australia or the Netherlands, in most cases, fraudulent use or misuse has happened at public administration entities, like in the fight against fiscal fraud, social benefits policies, where the risks of discrimination and bias is very important, specifically in moments of crisis. We've seen these debates in the United States, criminal justice and the bias here. So we have seen here that there is a greater vulnerability of the public sector on what citizens need, but also the need or the confidence that citizens have, and the potential use of these new technologies. And when we see many of these progress, improvements in the field of regulation and improvement of this technology, we also need to bear in mind how this applies to public administrations and the public sector in particular. So, for instance, data need to be trustworthy in order to avoid discrimination and bias. So, the AI principles of the OECD are very stringent about it. Sometimes, however, the problem we face in states are not, inadequate or inaccurate data. And this was really cumbersome during the pandemic in order to really reach those who really needed protection services the most.
And that wasn't about applying AI. That was about lack of data that was inclusive and that actually represented the realities of our societies. When we look, for instance, in terms of transparency and access to information, looking into the algorithms, for instance, in France, the algorithms have to be registered, or the registers used by the public authorities have to be transparent. And that's not always the case. In France, it's compulsory, but in China, they're just starting to do it. So applying that principle of transparency is difficult. We also see traceability in decision-making. That is a right, a human right. And for the public authorities, this is going to be a huge challenge. And then a final thing I would like to mention for the discussion is the need to go beyond the standards, to have the necessary institutional scaffolding and an appropriate rights protection that the citizens can resort to. And this is interesting. We see how many of the public institutions, those that are supposed to guarantee rights, are thinking about what's going to be my role, what's going to be the role of the public prosecution in these rights. What's going to be the role of the Court of Auditors to make sure that we audit the algorithms used by the public institutions? What's going to be the role of the justice system? And we see that the guarantee mechanisms are going to be important, and Spain there is leading the way as well in terms of public algorithms. But we see that when the different entities participate, the challenges are greater. For instance, in the Netherlands, after a huge uproar a couple of years back, the Court of Auditors audited 9 of the algorithms used by the government. Only 3 of them fulfilled the standards created by the government itself in areas of policies that were very important, such as access to social allowances and rights, immigration, security. So there are risky areas. From a fiscal perspective, that it's also important to consider. In the case of London, also the courts looked into this, and they blamed the government for not fulfilling the rights, and that had an important tax and political impact because the government fell. So when we look beyond, we have to look beyond the principles, access to information, and we have to think about the institutional scaffolding that we're going to need to supervise and guarantee those rights in public centers and in public policies. Thank you very much. Marc Etienne, standards. Standards also from the perspective of a large multinational that has to apply this technology in multiple geographies, right? That's another interesting approach.
Thank you for the invitation from the Senate and from the Club de Madrid, and I apologize very profoundly and truthfully for my lack of Spanish here today. As a French Canadian, we're very sensitive to language issues, and I find it awful that I'm the person here who's forcing you all to listen to my English. So I apologize for that, and I promise to try to address that as soon as I find more time, which will probably come when my kids get a bit older, but not right now. So I was asked to talk about the various different regulatory approaches that exist around AI. In my role, I see, frankly, hundreds of different AI bills coming across our desk throughout our time. And I see 2 kind of broad ways in which different jurisdictions are approaching AI regulation. One is a vertical approach, so essentially the UK, the US, to a certain extent Australia, mostly taking this line where they are addressing AI concerns through essentially vertical, so departments. So if you're going to have AI risks associated with transport, they are being handled by the Department of Transport or the Ministry of Transport. If there are AI risks associated with health, that ministry or that department will be responsible for that one, and so on. And then you have horizontal approaches, obviously with the EU AI Act at the forefront, and it having a Brussels effect that we're already seeing, Canada and a few other jurisdictions proposing bills that are also horizontal in nature. So there, as opposed to going by department, you are essentially trying to categorize the entire technology and then defining risks within that one broad bill. So despite the fact that you have kind of 2 different regulatory models, I would argue that they have kind of 3 really core issues that they share. One is they are risk-based, and that's a good thing. As a company, AWS, we certainly support risk-based regulations. But they face an issue in being specific in determining or describing what that risk category is. If you go too broadly, obviously you have a chance of overly capturing applications that you don't want to capture, that you want to be able to roll out into market as quickly as possible. Too specific, obviously you may fail to capture some risk that will then later materialize, and as regulators are looking to future-proof their technology as much as possible, they often tend to err towards the broad approach. In that sense, I probably think vertical AI regulatory models are a little bit better to capture specific risks in the sense that they're closer to their use cases by the very nature of how they're rolled out. But still, both take a risk-based approach. 2, they face a challenge in trying to unpack the AI value chain, right? So we tend to talk about artificial intelligence as if it's a unitary thing, when in practice, there are very many different actors along the value chain that result in a product that you or I will interact with. An analogy I often use is we want safe cars on the roads, right? We want to make sure we have a safe driving ecosystem and safe automobiles. But there isn't one set rule or one law for the car. There are specific obligations for brake pad manufacturers. Brake pads are supposed to have a certain degree of thickness. They shouldn't have asbestos in them. They should have clear labeling for which cars they can go onto or not. But brake pad manufacturers are not responsible for a driver turning left on a red light. They have their own set of distinct obligations. So unpacking that is a challenge for both horizontal and vertical pieces of regulation. And then the third is defining what good behavior is. And in both those models, they essentially mostly rely on standards. And it's why standards are so important and why we pay so much attention to them. The issue is that it takes a lot of time to develop standards. I don't know how many people here spend a lot of time in standards meetings. I sadly have to say that I do. They are very, very lengthy at all times of the day, including in the middle of the night when meetings are in Asia. And they take, frankly, a year or more to be developed. And so there's a lot of urgency to get the entire regulatory infrastructure in place to build trust in AI. But sadly, it takes a lot of time to also develop that infrastructure and to get it in place. The other issue is that standards tend to be, certainly at this point, kind of 30,000 feet high, right? You look at risk management system standards, for instance. If you read through them, guidance for non-AI expert is frankly minimal. So initially, or eventually, we need to get to a point where we get much closer to use cases with regards to the standards infrastructure, so that a common company that's adopting artificial intelligence is capable of reading those and understanding what good behavior is in their context. Between now and that moment, which is sometime in the future, I have to say that my view is that compliance will not, to the regulatory system that standards puts in place, will not be a cheap matter. It is a complex matter. It requires assistance. Internally in our team, we spent about a week looking at one of our services for one standard to understand its application to us and essentially map it out. And, I don't want anybody to shed a tear for Amazon here, right? We're capable of doing this. But I keep in mind our customers, I keep in mind startups, I keep in mind traditional enterprises that aren't AI enterprises who are going to struggle with this and who will need to be accompanied by external firms, frankly, to get them to a point where they're capable of understanding what compliance means for them. So I think that begets being precise with regards to those risk categories that we talked about at the start. If we are to, and we want to, capture risky AI applications, we also want to incentivize adoption in all the other areas which we consider to not be high risk. And obviously, if that barrier to adoption of compliance is too strong or too high, that will create an issue. And finally, because I know I'm at time, we wanted to talk about cooperation and harmonization in ways that we can work together. And I fully agree with Cam's point earlier here today that standards are going to act as a bridge for this, because they all forms of regulation essentially point to the same standards, and that's a very good thing. The TTC is probably a leading light on this front, but a lot of great work going on at the OECD. I see Carlos here, I see Louis here, that I'm happy to see that where a ton of great work is happening. And you see lots of different work happening at the G7, the G20, and I know that AI is on the agenda in a couple weeks in Japan as well. Not-for-profits, the Club de Madrid, Brookings Institute, Ditchley Park, Chatham House, a bunch of others are also convening stakeholders to try to advance these files. And finally, bilateral agreements are popping up left, right, and center. The UK and the US have just been working on an AI-specific bilateral agreement. The problem with that is that if we keep advancing mostly with bilateral agreements and then leave to the TTC, which is the EU and the US alone, to negotiate how we harmonize our approaches, kind of middle countries and third countries are essentially left out of that discussion. And I think there's a role there for the Global Partnership on AI to help advance on applied projects. It probably needs a bit of a shot in the arm to move forward with those. But I think there's many that would make sense. And, we talked about before, the importance of being able to have meetings like this in Spanish, or where I'm from, in French Canadian. Well, there's a project at the Global Partnership on AI on the discoverability of content leveraging artificial intelligence in other languages than Chinese or English. And so these types of applied projects, I think, lend themselves very, very well to the work of the Global Partnership on AI. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Muchísimas gracias. Creo que estamos siendo...
Thank you very much. We're being very disciplined with time. So, the global reality, and then we have our brother continent, the American continent, as a great territory, Latin America, where we could also have a greater collaboration with. What's your opinion? Well, thank you very much, Carlos. I would like to thank Senator Escarda and MP Delgado for opening the doors. Thank you to all the panelists, Irene, Cameron, Mark, Carlos, and Club de Madrid. We are here, but I think we have to acknowledge that here where José Manuel Romero was there, he's somehow related to the moderator. I don't know if he's the father or the mother of Club de Madrid, but at least he was a gynecologist in this meeting, or at least in Club de Madrid. And he must have done something right, because when we decided, the Secretary General of the United Nations, then, well, they were in between two members of Club de Madrid, Danilo Turk and Antonio Guterres. Antonio Guterres lost and had to go to the UN, and Danilo Turk won and stayed here. So I can either read you what I want to read, or I can read you what ChatGPT told me. I said, can you give me a speech about this? And he said, for Club de Madrid, it's essential that artificial intelligence policies are implemented in order to innovate and to maintain sustainable development. This means that the governments and companies have to work together to create legal frameworks and solid teams that help in the sensitive and sensible development of policies to help workers and promote collaboration, etc., etc. That was said by ChatGPT. I've only read 2 paragraphs, but I could have read, dear senators, imagine how dangerous this is. You're going to be here for 15 minutes listening to a speech made by ChatGPT. The world is scary. But let me talk about challenges, milestones, and something specifically that I'm going to talk about that has to do with the moderator. Historic milestones. I was a young engineer. I had a 20-year, I graduated when I was 20, and I started working in IBM Texas. A few months before I started IBM, well, I sold the big equipment, those humongous systems, do you remember? And IBM announced the PC, the first time that they were going to announce a PC for every person. And I remember I went to where the man that invented them, and he said, we're going to do an open system. These small decisions that changed the world. Apple closed IBM open. Now there's no IBM. No, Apple is in China and the world has changed. But it has changed the way in which we work. The first time that we could take work home on the floppy drive and looking into the spreadsheets in elementary text, and then we could take it back. That was thanks to the PC. Before, the working from home concept didn't exist. The world changed, but those who change it don't always win. But at least the world changed with the PC. Every 15 years, something happens, an earthquake happens. I don't know if you remember, there was one before, but the first time you could go into Internet Explorer from your PC, the first time you could look for information, it was incredible. From all over the globe, we were no longer disconnected, and everything changed again. And then the aggregators came, Facebook, Google, they packaged it up, the media didn't realize, many of them went into bankruptcy, the clouds came up, and who aggregates the data? Amazon is doing much better with web services than selling books. I'm still a Kindle client, though. I still read in Kindle, and I always lag behind. I download them faster than I read them. That's what happens sometimes. But anyway, the world changed with the aggregators, etc. 2007, another milestone. iPhone, Android came and changed the world. Why? Because all of that, from the PC to the cloud to the aggregators, we moved to our pockets. And I can bring this that has more processing capacity than systems I used to sell in the 1983 for millions. And this is what's happened. And before we get into AI, another thing that changed. China became a technological competitor that was undervalued. For South America, China is our main partner. It doesn't matter who you are. If you ask the president of Uruguay and Ecuador, they are not communists, and they can't wait for the free trade with China, because China buys energy, food, and minerals with increasing prices and at growing volumes. The best partner we have. And they're going to sign trade integration agreements. And in the trade integration agreement, there are going to be elements for the protection of IP and knowledge. And given that the US and Europe are closed, basically, to be honest here, they don't want to do trade integration. Let's not say later that the Chinese are putting WeChat instead of WhatsApp or Baidu instead of Google. Well, that is the reality. They are the only ones there, especially if Europe and the US do not realize that China doesn't no longer do copy and paste. It's now a technological innovator. The repression of Chinese of Xi Jinping to the Chinese companies has meant that there have been some steps back. But still, we come to November 2022. We're all watching Qatar, the Qatar World Cup, right? Well, a friend called me. I work with a group of people, and they said, you have to look at ChatGPT. And then you realize, and obviously we have fun. Oh, please write me a poem about the beautiful Titicaca Lake in Bolivia. And quicker. It's not Garcia Marquez, no, but at least he produces material really quickly. I'm really bad at programming. I was good when I was young. But if you said, write to me a program in Python that can count the number of views of a video per minute, and here we have it. I don't know if it's the best, it's better than the best people in Beijing or in California, but it's improving. And this is going to change the world in many ways. Opportunities, plentiful. Huge, fantastic opportunities. Imagine a justice system with artificial intelligence subject to the signature of a human being that solves 80–90% of the routine legal cases. I'm not talking here about what happened in Catalonia. I'm talking here about the things that come up all the time. It could be transformational. Or imagine doctors. You give it diagnosis, and based on the diagnosis, it gives you a recommendation. And if you look at the studies, it's very accurate compared to the best doctors that we have. And there are many, many other examples. I collect all the bots of Nicaragua because I tried to champion for democracy there. In Nicaragua, well, I've been thrown out from Cuba once and twice from other places, not yet from Nicaragua. Once I showed my mom, I said, please, ChatGPT, give me a speech between Evo Morales and Quiroga. It was very well made. So imagine that. Imagine what that can do.
Imagine that there's a release version of ChatGPT saying, I'm not going to make hatred speeches. We have senators and MPs here. Imagine what you can do in a campaign, in a political campaign, manipulating data. And if you're soft or too weak, you can just stay home and create different messages with AI, and that's it. You no longer need a campaign. AI is going to radically shift the world. There are huge opportunities ahead. And what's essential is regulatory capacity from states. And thank goodness the forum is held here, because in this furious technological battle between the United States and China, the only possibility to have sensitive regulation is Europe. And in the United States, there is also always a degree of interest because they can do like the things outside that cannot be used. And in Latin America, we are important. We are a third of the European population, but only 2/3 of the GDP. Yet, in a pyramid that we speak Portuguese, we speak Spanish, we are complementary to one another. And in this battle in between Chinese regulation, which in essence looks at saying, okay, do everything as long as you're not touching and twisting with the Communist Party. And where is going to be the best regulation in Europe? And in Latin America, we do not have regulatory capacity. Let me tell you a little secret. The Latin American banks were saved from the 2008 great financial crisis, Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, because of the Spanish regulation. Spanish banks with the prudential European regulation was more robust than what the Interdevelopment Bank said, or the American bank said. Even greater than Silicon Valley. So regulation in Latin American banks, I'm not going to go into the details, but what I want is to create a society of regulation where we have Europe and Latin America. We share freedom of expression, democratic principles. Yes, I do have exceptions like dictatorships in Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, but we share principles. You have the regulatory capacity that we do not have, because the integration of Latin America is not like the one in Europe. Ours only works in football. The only place where Chileans, Argentine football players play is football. But Carlos, where is the opportunity? Spain is to be holding the presidency of the European Union on the second quarter. And the CELAC summit is chaired by Spain. In this 80 pages document, include two little paragraphs. ChatGPT can do it for you. How can we ensure we can forge a regulatory framework between Latin America and Europe, being aware that we do not have all those, the track record that you have, but Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, and Colombia, with those four, you can solve for the most part. In Spanish and Portuguese to regulate this world that is coming. Thank you very much indeed.
Bueno, la verdad es que, no sé, Agustina, me pongo un poco en tus manos como maestra de ceremonia, si a lo mejor pedir...
Agustina, I leave you to it. A very quick Q&A session in the next 5 minutes. Mr. Kerry, last week we saw a letter where some EU MPs asked the von der Leyen and Biden for a global summit in the Trade and Technology Council. What is your view on that? Is this a real demand? How can this be articulated? So can this be an important step in the regulatory agenda, this global summit?
I think a global summit on AI can help to build on what President Biden has already done in convening a global summit on democracy. It involves many of the same countries that are in the EU that are a part of the global partnership on AI. I think we have a ways to go to lay the groundwork to do that, and I think the work of the OECD, of the Trade and Technology Council, and other forums like that really need to lay the groundwork. I liken what we are going through with AI, both in terms of the technological development and regulatory development, is a design-build project. When one designs as the construction is taking place. Even the developers of AI do not fully understand the technology. So much of this needs to be iterated as we go along. I think we need to lay some foundation along those lines in order to have that kind of global summit.
Irene,
Irene, I do not intend you to develop this in great detail about cybersecurity. You've touched upon the regulatory agenda, and your reflections are very interesting, the need to have a global regulation. Yet, what do you envisage could be the risks from the cybersecurity point of view if a non-global regulation is imposed? We could orchestrate another ad hoc session for this, but we have seen the intersection between AI and digital transformation and also cybersecurity, detecting malware attacks in an exponential fashion. So we've only seen the good benefits of it. And it goes beyond the human capacity. So we were saying, how can quantum computing help in particular? What is unexplored and was mentioned in the previous panel are the cybersecurity risks of the massive handling of data with AI. Access to that storage capacity, because we do still have a regulatory framework which is completely different based on the geography where we are. There is a cultural conception of different rights and values, and that's what's at stake when we need to protect it, especially from the data point of view, but from a broader angle. We're talking about spying and things that threaten national security. Carlos, a very quick question or reflection. How do you think this regulation for the in order to ensure discipline technology, how can this be translated into an efficient regulation even by the public powers, the states? How can this materialize, this natural step? No, it's not going to be a natural step because, you know, we need to understand the different logics of our public administrations in view of the potential risks. But I would like to take a look at the public administration spaces, which are very interesting, namely the role of cities in this debate and the local authorities, because cities like Helsinki and Barcelona have made great progress in these public algorithms. The charters on digital rights of the cities are also in great progress, and I believe that's a great space in the density of the states and the public services provided to citizens. And part of the progress that has been reflected with the support of the Eurocities Association, which is also present here in Madrid. These are very interesting spaces, and cities like Amsterdam, New York, Rotterdam are deploying very interesting things. So, you know, perhaps we could reach this with citizens. Yeah. Nargetien, one question. You have applied standardization and you've had relations with the SMEs. You've talked about the cost of regulatory compliance. Any magic recipe? How can we help SMEs? Because this is one of the key aspects that we need to ensure when we bring about regulations, so that the compliance costs are not that cumbersome to these SMEs. Thank you.
That's a really good question. And that, again, is the million-dollar question, or billion or trillion-dollar question, depending on the number of the study you look at. Look, I think you hit headwinds when you try to invent either regulation or summits, for that matter, like this global summit on artificial intelligence, without having a crisply defined problem that you are trying to address that reflects facts, right? Not to bring corporate lingo here, but one of the baselines of success for AWS and Amazon has been to be customer obsessed, look at a problem that a customer has identified, reverse engineer from that, find a quick solution, find another problem, identify from that, and the sum parts of that work generates, you know, massively competitive products. So I think in this case, what you're going to have to look at is look at the standards where they're at, look at, honestly, a specific use case, a company, and look at how it's capable or not of adapting that standard to itself. I think ultimately it'll probably be use cases that take the form of something called schemas. So interpretations of a group of standards for a specific use case, and then doing your best to accompany them through that process. And that may require some financial investment on the part of governments too. You know, if you're going to be doing compliance work to make sure you can sell your product, that should be tax credit eligible. I mean, in Canada, when I used to work for a startup, when I pulled engineers off of working on developing a product to put them on standards, then the tax credit they would get for doing research thrown out the window. It would cost me more money to actually make them work on compliance than if they built products. That's a basic, small thing. I think the accumulation of hundreds probably of small moves like that is going to lead to a system that can function.
Gracias. Presidente, para concluir,
Distinguished Chairman, to conclude, you left it there, the possibility to expand our regulatory agenda to Latin America. And one of the key priorities of the Spanish presidency of the European Union is to twist around every time there is a Spanish presidency to look at Latin America. There is a summit in July. As you probably know, the European Union has cooperated with the different geographies, with Japan, Korea, Singapore, India, Canada. We've always said, and Latin America. How do you believe we can bring this closer? Do you think this is feasible to expand these cooperation mechanisms and to bring regulatory agendas closer and our digital agendas closer? Thank you, Carlos. I believe it is not only possible but also badly needed. If the European Union is recognized as the beacon behind the generation of regulations, because it is obvious that they do not have the technological giants that the US and China are producing, but they are a very large market, whereas in Latin America we are a reduced market in terms of money, but when it comes to users of digital products, we have a little bit more than you. Even more when we are talking about young creative population. I've seen the figures. We have huge penetration. Shakira is well known around the world, Messi as well. The Latin Americans are creators of cultures that are expanded and exported marvelously in the digital world via video, because they are bored of reading. So we do have tremendous opportunities. By way of example, Facebook, WhatsApp allowed you to unlimitedly forward messages until the Brazilian campaign started, and they have improved the massive dissemination of fake news. And because of the Brazilian campaign, you cannot forward more than 5 messages, because of the fake news in Brazil during the latest presidential campaign. So, 2 final conclusions on this topic. Number 1, in the world, not only because of TikTok or what happens in the United States or China. In the world, however, there's going to be a trend with the progress of AI guaranteeing that data are under the countries where they are being used. I may have Gmail on a server in Nevada, California, but if I'm going to grant my medical record, or if I'm going to upload the trials and procedures with names and money, there's going to be a natural trend saying, hey, the cloud can reside in Europe. The Brazilian cloud shall be in Brazil, and as follows. And in the European Union, let's work with Latin America, with the scouted countries. What's worth it is G4. When I am excluded as Bolivia, well, I have no right, but Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, and Mexico. That's where 3/4 of our economy is, 2/3 of the population. with these powers that you've got in Europe, and perhaps this is interesting for Argentina, because I come from La Paz. Many have flown from other places. I landed from the only place where Messi is not scoring any single goal. He came 3 times. He did not manage well. He'll have the last opportunity in September. But if he doesn't score, because he has 800 million followers on the networks, he can do an AI video scoring goals in La Paz and being happy about it. Well, thank you very much for this panel, and I forgot to thank Club de Madrid and AWS, and I would like to mention this. I started preparing for the civil servant examinations, and now my colleague, he's very clever. He's working at Amazon Web Services. Distinguished senators and MPs, thank you very much for opening the doors of all the Spaniards to discuss these important topics here today. Thank you.
Bueno, y con ese fascinante intercambio llegamos yo a la.
And with this wonderful exchange, we come to the last session, last panel. I'm going to give them just a minute so that they can say hello, goodbye, and take a seat.
Bueno, como decía, llegamos ya a la última sesión titulada Construyendo.
So we come to the last session, Building a Democratic, Trustworthy and Accountable AI, a Shared Responsibility. We'll have Mr. Gala from the, no, sorry, we're going to have Mr. Oscar Corcho, Director of the Master AI for Gov from the Polytechnic University of Madrid.
Dándole al micro. Muy bien, pues vamos a terminar.
Perfect. So let's conclude with this panel. We have spoken in the previous panel a lot about regulation. It has been one of the elements that has been dealt with, and we've also spoken about standards. I think that one of the objectives of this panel is to also talk about governance. Governance, and that has to do with the fact that when creating AI systems that are democratic, trustworthy, and accountable, as we say in the session's title, we also need to remember that we have an ecosystem with different players. It's not just the government, it's also the users, the companies that develop, and all those involved. I'm not going to take too long. I'd rather start giving the floor to the different participants. I think we're going to really enjoy their contributions, and therefore I would like to start with Cristina. Cristina Galach, who is the Special Commissioner for the Alliance, let me see if I say this properly, the Alliance for the New Economy of Language. And with that, we kind of summarize everything that Cristina is currently doing, as well as her prior experience. The goals of today's session, this afternoon's sessions now, is to talk about governance and how governance can be done, taking into consideration all the different players that could be in many different places. And I'm sure you're going to speak about language, right? Knowing where you've come from, but we've also talked about ChatGPT with Mr. Quiroga. And that's also going to have an impact, right, on everything that we can do in terms of governance. So, Cristina, I give you the floor. We have 5 minutes. Thank you, Oscar. For those of you who are not from Spain, and there's many of you here, maybe I would like to just make a brief definition of this alliance. It's a public initiative by the government of Spain. Is the PERTE, is the development program funded by the EU to make sure that Spanish and other languages in the Spanish territory do not lose ground in AI or in the internet. Actually, that they gain ground when we have this overpowering presence of English language. So I think this is an initiative that needs to be included, and we normally try to do it in coordination with the Latin American countries, because this is a common language of 600 million. Acronyms such as PERTE are not known beyond the Spanish administration. They are it's a plan for strategic projects. And if we move on and continue with the words mentioned by Mr. Quiroga, I would like to say something which is very important, which is that we are subjected to shock therapy. Shock therapy that came to us or happened to us in November when ChatGPT came about, as Mr. and President Quiroga said. And then it turns out that a machine can answer any types of questions with great quality, even though it has some hallucination moments, and they are not very few, but it's normally quite appropriate. And I think that we realized at the time, in November, how important large-scale language models are. And without a doubt, they are. It's the AI technology that has had a greater impact over the last decade. And this is something that we must highlight. We are still under shock because of ChatGPT. And I would like to say that AI is taking humongous leaps, especially AI linked to linguistic data. And this is something, those leaps can be compared to the apparition of PC, internet, smartphones, and soon, whenever we buy a device, ChatGPT will probably be already embedded in that. So that poses many challenges, not just regulatory, but also to do with technology sovereignty. And in the case of Spain and of the Latin American countries, with an AI based on language, it's necessary to work on investments in order to have huge amounts of linguistic data in Spanish language, so that we are not dependent on English language. An English language that pollutes in a positive way, and not always though, that pollutes our language. And so it's a necessity to underline this and how important it is that for strategic purposes we must respond to this shock. And also what the previous panel said, this has to also have a legislative response, but not only. And so we need, in these difficult moments, to respond with balanced and realistic positions that are not just about embracing without thought any technological development, quite the opposite. We have to attribute or allocate to technology what it can do and not everything. We need to defend legislation, but we shouldn't not incentivize innovation. And this is key. For instance, the regulatory aspect in Europe is very important. It doesn't have to be just Europe that is. Europe cannot just be a legislative driver. It has to be an innovation driver too. And that's why we need to be able to respond with wisdom and knowledge to the fatalistic and apocalyptic messages. I think this is key. We've seen letters and we received letters from very expert people that have spoken about destruction. I don't think we could put fences in the countryside, because otherwise we will not be able to reach our goals. So, what is the type of analysis that we are doing in my team? We work on how to promote Spanish language and the other Spanish official languages to gain ground and not lose ground in the digital environment dominated by English and Chinese. I think it's key to have this view of strategic reasons. Europe, Spain, Latin American countries, we are interested in working to consolidate technological sovereignty, which must be robust. And in the case of Spain, I think this is clearly a country purpose. Also because we care about the business, and we want to have a position in the business, not just in the consumption business, but also in the creation business. Also because we may be in an area of comfort with regulatory capabilities. Everyone is praising our legislative capabilities on AI. However, they don't praise us for our investment capabilities. And we've seen the existing data, and we've seen that private companies from the US have invested in 1 year half of what Europe expects to invest in 10 years. So this will not give us technological sovereignty. We will not be able to position our languages, such as the Spanish and the other European languages, in a space of AI based on technological data. We will not be able to achieve what we want to achieve. And in this situation of geostrategic confrontation, China, the US, Europe cannot just position itself with legislation. It has to also have investment capabilities and technological leadership. So, at a difficult time like now, when we are thinking, if we think about investments in order to obtain the results that we aim to have in computational linguistics, data, etc., it's very timely. And if we are able to inspire all the EU countries, it'll be even better, because that will give us great international leadership. We've spoken about the Spanish presidency of the EU in the last semester of the year. This is something we need to think about, because the current ChatGPT or the future ChatGPT can be dominated with linguistic data that comes from where it comes. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. Thank you, Cristina. We've spoken about linguistic data. Now I would like to introduce Ana, responsible for artificial intelligence in Iberia and Amazon Web Service. Ana Jimenez. There are many kinds of data, right? What is your view on this topic? Thank you very much. I am so honored to be here. First with you. You were my professor at university. I see other professors of mine and students and people from the AI ecosystem in Spain. I'm so happy to be here. It's been many years. I'm sure my students have probably heard how needed this conversation is, how important it is to bring together different people with different perspectives and different ideas on AI. I think that we need to get together in order to create the railway for this high-speed train that AI really is. We must not forget that part of the innovation that we have seen and witnessed in the past centuries has come from human minds and how we have created different technologies. And AI is just one more new technology that we have created, and we need to adapt it to the needs of the current times. AI, in that sense, will not stay on the sideline. It has many advantages, and we have spoken about that. AI will allow us to innovate, to transform many of the professions. In all the professions, we'll have like a robotic arm, and we'll be able to include the knowledge of this data in our daily work. We'll be able to optimize and use sheep to better manage water. We'll be able to clean the sewage system in cities better. We'll be able to manage all these underground tunnels underneath us that it's very difficult for a human, but it's very easy for a drone with computational capacities. It also allows marketing people to know their customers better. Financial directors will be able to assess the market situation better, assess the risks, abnormalities. It will allow us to personify or adapt education to different people. It's not that we, as human beings, cannot do it. It's just that we are not able to do it as fast. It's not that machines do it better, they just do it faster. And we've discussed things that everyone's talking about, such as how many professions which are very automated or easy to automate will be at risk, how there are some highly risky user cases, such as the ones mentioned by the European Commission, with healthcare, risk, education, etc. How AI will be applied for those scenarios. But I'll take a step further. I think AI identifies data patterns and is able to promote those patterns. There's a lot of discourse about how it exacerbates fanatism or creates echo chambers. It repeats patterns, and it may even create addictions. Technology is included within the National Plan for Drugs in Spain. For instance, TikTok videos are forbidden in my family. And artificial intelligence has to be regulated. It's not that we have to put fences in the open countryside, but we need to be able to legislate it, to use it fairly and properly. But this is very, very complicated, highly complicated. This is something we will not be able to resolve in a year's or 2 years' time, because the AI being regulated depends on bringing together many people in a single room and breaking the Tower of Babel that is created about it. AI is not just a Tower of Babel in terms of the complexity of ethical scenarios that we may have. I'm not a policymaker, I'm an IT engineer. But in my lessons, I give an example. I say, okay, imagine a self-driving car that's been trained to drive down a road, etc. It doesn't come out of the white lines unless someone decides to paint over the white lines anyway. And imagine it runs over and it can run over a little girl or an elderly person. And I normally ask my students who are Europeans or Latin Americans, and I said, come on, who would you kill, the kid or the elderly person? And they always say, the elderly person. They always say it. She's lived a long life. The child hasn't lived yet. Ask the same question in Japan. Maybe in Japan, the same question, maybe they decided to ride over to kill the child because they have a huge respect for the elderly. So this is, people are different, nations are different. And in AI, not only do we have to consider those complex scenarios from an ethical perspective, but we also have to bring together different profiles with our own perspective. It's the perfect boiling broth for the creation of these hybrid profiles that are such a necessity in the professional world. We're not talking just here about people from science or humanities. We need more profiles that bring together all those different skills. We need legislation, yes, but we also need a strategy. I think we need a strategy. And how do we build it? Let's imagine that we all get together in this room, and then we all go for a drink, and we have lengthy discussions, and imagine that then we separate and separate the work, allocate the work to different people, and we have, in 2 years' time, great legislation on AI. Peter Drucker said a couple of years back that culture would have strategy for breakfast, meaning if the culture doesn't support the strategy will fail. We need to train population. We need people to understand what AI is, because there are many films that have taken AI to extremes, things that are just down to the imagination. In AWS, we are aware that AI is not something that falls on the court only of companies, especially technological companies. We want, therefore, to create user cases. We want to help companies adopt AI in whatever sense. And when we do that, we always ask, in order to develop that user case, not just data scientists and engineers that will program that user case and will know the technology, but we also bring the people from products, from the business area, from the legal department. We bring together all the people that have something to say about that user case. And it's very interesting what happens then. First, this is brainstorming, and then it's what I call the aha moment, when people start looking at each other and understanding each other and understanding how to work together. For instance, last week, I had a talk for a marketing manager from a great insurance company globally, and I explained to her what AI was, what machine learning was, what computer vision was, what NLP was. And when I finished, there was a few seconds of silence, and then she said, "You have to tell this to everyone in the business. This is for everyone, not just for me, because with a business perspective, they may understand this and how to use this." Many times what happens when we talk about AI is that we don't know what the people in front of us thinks. We don't know how the people we are facing will look at this, from which perspective, how they will use the AI. I like to give an example about AI, and it's how AI came about. AI came about in the 50s, at the end of the 40s, 50s. It wasn't called AI at the time. And it came about in the massive conferences. Those were conferences held in the US, where they brought together people from different profiles: sociologists, psychologists, doctors, technologists, physicians, experts in physics, etc., to see what they had in common and where the conversations led. And one of the conferences within the massive conference was one on cybernetics, where they accepted papers on 3 key tracks: computer artifacts, information, and value of information. Now, sounds very old-fashioned, but if we translate it into current terms, it would be computer artifacts would be technology, information will be data, and value of information will be algorithms. Those are the pillars of AI. They are algorithms, recipes, and all of this is executed on the technology. And what's happened to technology? Technology has evolved a lot. Since Gordon Moore in 1965 said that every 2 years the speed of processing will double, that's well gone. Our computing speed is huge, but that presents also certain challenges. Technology consumes energy, and this type of technologies that support AI consume a lot of energy, and we need specific technology to make it sustainable.
At AWS, we have our own ChatGPT. Yes, we do. but we have also developed chips in order to support the sustainability of such technology and to reduce the cost by almost 70%. We had technology, we had algorithms, which are nothing else than recipes that detect anomalies in data points at a very accurate level. But where they struggle with a regulation, it's because of the explanation behind algorithms. What are these algorithms really doing? Because as we analyze more and more complex data, the explanation is more complex. Because if somebody comes and says, "Hey, Anna, what is your fashion style?" Well, that really depends. I can tell an awful lot of things, but if somebody asks me, why am I wearing these earrings? Because it's two triangles and because I was going to talk about AI, it seemed really mathematical, and I chose them instead of the pearls. Algorithms are, struggling with the explanation sometimes. And finally, with data, when we talked about the type of data, as Oscar said, years ago, when the algorithms were brought about, there were no data points. But now with data, sensors, we've got endless data points. But be careful, because these data points are, scattered, if I may. These algorithms do not understand anything about justice, democracy, bias. All they do is to gather data that we put in their hands and then find patterns and to reproduce them. There isn't any creative AI. It does not generate anything. It does reproduce it. What they find in data. So a couple of weeks ago, I generated I was using a stable diffusion tool in order to create different images, profile images. We were told at AWS that we had this role to develop our artificial intelligence department. So to create this, I am the only woman within the team. And clearly my images were more sexualized, because how these algorithms were fit. And there were certain images where I asked the machine to generate images where I could look working with the computer screen at the back. And I had a lot of images with either two fingers, 3 hands. The AI does not understand semantics. Semantic is given by the thinking brain. So I speak about data. Well, data points. It does depend upon the user case. If you ask me what happens with data, I will say, like with the earrings, it does depend on the user case. I have also worked in speech recognition, and the word grand or large could be excellent in some domain. It does always depend upon the context. So in my experience, or what I think, it's combining people with different angles working in specific user cases. Thank you very much. Let's not lose our focus now. We will continue talking about accountability, a trusted AI. We now have Mark Serra from Ibinta. What can you tell us about this, Mark? Well, thank you very much indeed. I'm very pleased to be here today and to be able to enjoy and listen to these interesting reflections. AI is part of our day-to-day basis. We interact with it without noticing. It does affect the way in which we consume audiovisual content. We purchase. It helps us find jobs and a partner. And I agree, many of these tasks, I can even dare and say that these models work better and that can give a more accurate prediction than humans, like machine learning models that can win chess, for instance, to a worldwide chess player, or those that can detect certain weaknesses and can assist GPs and general physicians in our country and elsewhere. Therefore, AI is already being very meaningful to a lot of corps and companies like AWS, for instance, with their existing cloud infrastructure, are ensuring and enabling these companies to benefit from these models in many occasions. In this regard, today, we have talked about some applications where AI is very valuable. We have seen a lot of applications where, unfortunately, these AI systems presented some problems. Some of them have been raised. We have seen the cases in the Netherlands, but elsewhere. We have also seen some flawed cases in China. And I agree with Anna. We need to regulate in the field of artificial intelligence to be regulated based upon the potential harm that the application can have. That means that the same machine learning model, depending on its application, can be considered high risk or not. And based on this category, we will have to run through an assessment obligations or not. So I love the division of responsibilities among the different sectors in the value chain. And here we have said there are obligations in order to ensure data quality, the reduction of biases, micro biases, but also transparency, human oversight in high-risk cases. There are many things behind this. Here, however, when we are saying there are AI systems or general purpose systems, I think we're talking about a separate paradigm. When we talk about the application of AI systems, oftentimes when regulation was created, they were thinking about AI systems that did have a very clear, unique single application. So this division in the value chain, as far as data quality was concerned, transparency as well, was well distributed. What happens, whatever happens with the general purpose AI models, the amount of data points to be trained is huge, and human talent, human resources that only the big techs have at the moment, the American big techs. Then these models, because these are general purpose models, will escape from this regulation, really will be completely alien to it. All this part of responsibility will fall within the actors in the value chain that decide to apply these models to a certain case. So whatever happens with these AI models in this joint distribution of responsibilities, we believe this is also a very thorny area, because it is important to ensure that these models have already represented some of the risks, such as the data that they use, which are obtained throughout internet scrapping, where they could obtain personal information. And oftentimes, people can retrieve personal data from other individuals who have used it in order to train the models, so there are certain risks. And apart from this, such data, well, the paradigm that we had before, if you're a company with your own data, you have control over your own data. the quality of those data points. But if we are using a pre-trained model where you don't know where these data come from, and you have the accountability, the responsibility to prove data quality, there may be an issue here. Another aspect which is worth mentioning, because here we are, or the title of this presentation are From the Principles to the Practice, and this is a very theoretical presentation, yet when we talk about things like biases or how can we reduce such biases, so oftentimes it's, okay, on a practical level, what does this mean? Well, in many cases, we do not have the well-defined standards which can help us run this assessment. They can help developers mitigate these biases. So this is, in this case, something where the Horizon project that was mentioned before, that uses European funds to R&D projects in order to find the necessary measures in order to predict and mitigate these biases. I believe this is extremely important. Sorry, it seemed I came here with a gloomy, apocalyptic view. It was not my intention. Quite contrary, I am a user of ChatGPT. I think it is a marvelous tool. They can shed some light and give value to an awful lot of companies. And I believe there are endless opportunities. People from OpenAI have published an article where they say that with the language models, large language models, but also with the applications that are built on top, it would be possible to impact 50% of the US labor market tasks. When they say impact or gain exposure to, it's because they believe they may reduce by 50% the time they spend in doing this. So at a corporate level, this is also paramount, because this can increase productivity tremendously. And it may have an impact in the society overall. And it is positive. It can also improve productivity and help people do same task faster. I am also certain that, as with other disruptions, it is also going to generate an awful lot of job posts. Excellent, Mark. Thank you very much for your presentation. Let's now move on to Cristina Pombo, the coordinator of the FERLAC of the Inter-American Development Bank. What is the overview that you have from a different angle across the pond in Latin America? What is your view on this? Thank you, Cristina.
Muchas gracias, Oscar. Muchas gracias al Club de Madrid.
I'd like to thank Oscar and AWS and Club de Madrid and the Senate. I must confess, after listening to all these panels and after these reflections, I have more questions than answers, which is interesting in my view, but I think these kinds of debates really leave us with an awful lot of questions. I would like to spend my next 5 minutes to present from Latin America and the Caribbean and the multilateral stance, and especially from the view of the Inter-American Development Bank. And I disagree with some aspects with President Quiroga, but we can discuss this later on. The latest technological disruptions are always thought for the global north. The data that feeds most systems used by the systems come from industrialized, developed economies. A simple example, my sister in Colombia, she was pregnant. She used a health app developed by a Colombian company, and she started having some alerts, something's happening, and when she asked the doctor No, it is that app that uses data from white men from the United States because they receive data from the NHS. And it seems funny, but it happened. And it happens because many of the startups that start working with these data, they use the existing DBs, and many of them are, white males in the global north. And not only with data, but it also happens with the different variables that feed the models. We are currently developing early alert systems in Latin America and in Estonia they did something similar. When we were in discussions with them, the variables that they were using in order to determine the dropout rates in Uruguay and Colombia. So we need to think about those things. We need to really take those variables into consideration. And I believe in the region, Latin America and the Caribbean, the usage goes way beyond that. So providing diversity because of usage, not because of the development. In Latin America and the Caribbean, R&D investments are very poor. Yet we have extensive diversity. Well, extensive, more than that. Well, it is rather broad diversity that really enriches the debate. And it can really benefit AI. So we live in the continent with the greatest inequalities, so it is relevant for governments to be aware that technology is a new inequality factor. And it's not trivial to say it. To say that the digital divide may be broadening and broadening. These type of debates are also very important for us in Latin America and the Caribbean. See what the references are doing in Europe, in the European Commission, the European Parliament, and President Quiroga said it. Coming to an agreement in Latin America is hardly difficult. The Inter-American Development Bank is not an association for us to come to an agreement, or no, it is for us to understand what governments are doing and to generate, to raise awareness, which is very important. The systems may not have access to sources of information that may not be verified, and they may offer false response. And I agree, we need to be cautious and even be a bit concerned, really. So the ChatGPT, can fool us from a cognitive standpoint of view. It knows almost everything, but not everything. Something interesting happened with us in ChatGPT is the democratization of what's happening, as Christina said it. It is now, it is at your fingertips, very quickly, getting to know it. You know what, President Quiroga happened? Well, Macri did it the other day at a speech. It was used by some judges in Colombia. I'm talking about case law here. And in China, some physicians also used it in order to run a diagnosis. So people are already using it. Hey, this is the AI. So from the Inter-American Development Bank, we have deployed this initiative, Fair Luck. In 2017, the government in a Latin American country hired a big tech company to run an algorithm that could predict which women were going to be pregnant. So, which girls were likely to be pregnant? And they said, I'll tell you with an 86% of accuracy. Here you are. From then on, that government came to us and said, okay, can you help us think how this data is used? Because obviously, the regulation of AI has to think about data regulation. And in Latin America and the Caribbean, we're still in nappies. So what happens in Latin America and in the Caribbean? We have a great opportunity to do things right from the scratch. The question that Mr. Quiroga was asked, how can we bring the regulatory and digital agendas closer? It made me think a lot. And I'll close with that, even though you didn't ask me that.
I think an approach is that Latin America and the Caribbean can learn from what you have witnessed, from what you have experienced, and start learning from those things. Additionally, we have to start thinking about systems or interoperability of standards. It can be said quickly, but it's difficult. We spoke about all the standards. That how can we make them interoperable? How can we make sure they work under a single umbrella for all the Latin American and Caribbean countries? Events such as this, I think, are a great space to continue thinking about complicated topics. So thank you very much for having invited Latin America and the Caribbean. And I agree with Sasha on the concerns regarding biases and micro-biases. There are many things that seem to be obvious, and my colleagues have heard me say this. My grandmother used to say that what's obvious is not spoken about, and because it's not spoken about, it's forgotten. Well, thank you very much, Cristina. We conclude this panel. Because of time issues, we may not have time to ask additional questions. So, Mr. Danilo Turk.
Here, and then please, can you share with us?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And although I have only 5 minutes, I will not want to miss this opportunity to say how happy I am to be part of this panel, because this is the only gender-based panel that we had this afternoon. So somebody has to notice this publicly. And I think it's very good that we have a gender-based panel discussing governance, building democratic, trustworthy, and accountable system. Now that, of course, is a big task, a task which we have touched upon, briefly in all the panels, and I'm not suggesting that this panel is somehow separated from the rest of our discussion. It's been very much part of our discussion, and I think that if one looks at the whole flow of discussion this afternoon, one could see a very strong commitment to certain core values expressed in human rights and democratic society. Now that's very important, because it is important to emphasize in any discussion, in any serious consideration of artificial intelligence, that artificial intelligence must not be only driven by profit and power accumulation. It has to serve the people. And of course, in order to go further than that, we have to talk about human rights. We have to talk about democratic society. But of course, this is not easy, and it may be actually quite dangerous if we are left at the level of generalities and superficial discussion about core values. Now, we in the Western world like to pride ourselves with our commitment to core values, but we sometimes, or often, or most of the time, fail to explain in detail what we mean by core values in a specific context, in the context of development of artificial intelligence, where we have to go much further than the general principles such as those that are established in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or in other basic pronouncements. We have to go further. And I think the discussion this afternoon was helpful in that regard, because it elucidated many aspects which are not necessarily seen in a much more technology-driven discussions on artificial intelligence that are dominating this time. So I think when we talk about the education, the need to prepare people to be able to use the tools of digitalized society, we are talking about something very fundamental and something which lies in the core of our values-based approach. When we talk about the need to overcome the gender gap and generational gap, I mean, these, of course, are very important things, and they have to do with human rights. And I think we still need, the world still needs a lot more work on building that understanding, that when one talks about artificial society, artificial intelligence in democratic society, one talks about all these things, and we have to go into much more detail in this discussion. Of course, there are points of departure already. We have heard about standards which exist. We have heard about experience that exists with regard to problems of bias, which leads to racial and other forms of unacceptable discrimination. And of course, these are important experiences which already exist, for example, with the questions of facial recognition and others, and have to be kind of factored in future development of artificial intelligence as part of our basic commitment to
fundamental values of human rights and democratic society. The question then is, of course, I wanted to make this point very strongly at the beginning, because I think that without such a foundation, without such a firm basis, further progress is not likely to be very quick and adequate. Now, then, of course, there are questions about institutional side. I mean, which of the institutions can help? And obviously, most importantly, which international institutions can help? Here again, we have certain aspects on which the world can build, the OECD principles on artificial intelligence, the UNESCO recommendations on the ethics of artificial intelligence and others. So, I mean, there's some work has been done within the institutions. We heard about the Council of Europe, Gregor Stroin told about earlier and so forth. So, I mean, all this should be seen as an encouragement to further institutional work for a better governance and operationalization of artificial intelligence policies. Now, here, of course, I have to mention something that was also mentioned before, that obviously the digital transformation showed that technology is moving faster than response and governmental regulation and everything else. That's clear and that's not new. But the question is, how does the international institutional system respond to this very, how should I say, serious and expected challenge? I should say, in this particular context of how to go further, what next steps should be, that it would be worth looking at the report of the High-Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism, which the Secretary General Antonio Guterres has put together about a year ago, and which has just produced its report with recommendations which were transferred to the Secretary General on 18 April, which means last week. So that report contains 6 shifts that we believe are important. And when I say we, I would like to say I was a member of that high-level advisory board on behalf of Club de Madrid. So Club de Madrid is trying to be as active as possible in these discussions, and that, I think, proves the point made by Escoajo earlier this afternoon, that retirement is not something about retire from, but it is retire for something, and we have retired in order to do things which we believe are meaningful. And of course, participation of Club de Madrid in this high-level advisory board was meaningful. Now, the aspiration that was defined by the board as necessary today is the aspiration to support a just digital transition that unlocks the value of data and protects against digital harms. That is how we start. We also, meaning the board, understand that we live in a time of a fragmented space, digital space, and that there have to be really serious effort to lay the foundations for enabling architecture for the data century. This is the kind of language that you will find in the report. And then the question is, okay, what does that concretely mean? What do you propose? Here are 2 types of proposals which we are making. One is to create a global commission on just and sustainable digitalization. Now, this may sound a bit old-fashioned and inadequate. Commission, who is excited about commissions? Now, we were thinking about a commission which would work in a similar way as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has worked. In other words, not a commission that produces resolutions, but a commission which consists of people with deep understanding of the problem from various sectors, from not only government world, but primarily from technical world, from the world of business and so forth, who would be able to identify the challenges to the development of artificial intelligence and digital transformation more generally on a continuous basis. On a continuous basis with providing serious analytical work and stimulating a kind of a global cooperation which will be necessary in the future. So the need for such a commission, we believe, is there, and it should be done in a way which is inspired by successful models which we know. It's not going to be a complete carbon copy of the IPCC, of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but it will be trying to use that's our proposal, that would be trying to use some of the basic experience from that commission. And it would deal, as we say in the report, with knowledge function, data governance, inclusive and sustainable digitalization, with human rights in digital age, and all that should be a matter that requires very deep analysis of practices and problems in order to stimulate international cooperation for an adequate governance in the field of digitalization generally and artificial intelligence more particularly. Now, we of course have to think in this context about what international cooperation means. And in this context, I would like to tell you about the news that came today from China about an hour before we started our meeting, and was reported by CGTN, the Chinese public TV system. And the news is this: China is willing to deepen international data cooperation within the framework of the Global Development Initiative, said President Xi Jinping today. Okay, I don't know if President Xi Jinping heard about our seminar and wanted to come with an initiative before we started our discussion. I don't think that that is the case, but who knows? I mean, maybe there is something in the air which we all share. I mean, we and the Chinese and everybody else. And if one looks at the report from China today, you would see that obviously the point of departure and the conceptual framework that President Xi has in mind is different from what we are discussing today. It is about his own global development initiative, which is supporting developing countries with better resources, more resources to do, to provide better development. And very importantly, he speaks about sustainable development goals, which is a kind of a global vision that was adopted by the United Nations back in 2015, and obviously is not being carried out, is not subject to realization as was expected. So we are disappointed. But this year there will be a discussion about sustainable development goals, and there is a need to bring the artificial intelligence aspect into the picture. And now the question is, what should the Western world, people like us, do vis-à-vis China? What should we do in that regard? Now, I'm coming from Slovenia, which is a country which we used to, one of the countries which we used to define as countries in transition. And of course, much of my life was transition. And I remember from my personal experience that transition is best served if people are engaging other people in a discussion. And that's how you make transition effective. That's how you make it less bumpy. That's how you make it less violent, less conflict-ridden. All right, I don't want to project any naive and speculative expectation, but I think that there is a need to engage China in this context. And I'm really very curious what the Western world will say when the leaders meet later this year in the Global Summit on Sustainable Development on issues of artificial intelligence and sustainable development goals for the future. One doesn't have to look in a single formula in this regard. One doesn't have to look in the single formula because, as I explained with regard to the Commission is not meant to provide definitive results. There is no single formula and no immediate results. That has to be clear. But there is a process in which I think creativity of the process has to be demonstrated. And I believe that that's the way forward into a better governance. And of course, it's not an obstacle to other forms of international cooperation. Now, President Quiroga earlier on spoke about the need to engage the European Union, European institutions with Latin America. Wonderful. I know from various sources, including from Gregor Stroin, who spoke about this afternoon, that Council of Europe is working with some partners outside Europe, with the United States, with Japan and others. Why not with Latin America? Why not with some, let's say, most active Latin American countries to start with, and then, of course, perhaps with a larger Latin American framework? There is no obstacle to that. And there is no reason why this sort of cooperation shouldn't be pursued in parallel and as part of this global vision of sustainable development goals and an attempt to find proper way of dealing with artificial intelligence in this context. Now, there are other aspects as well. I know I have exceeded my time frame, but as you have seen, I have become very excited about things, and you will, I hope, pardon me for that. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Creo que con esto terminamos.
Thank you so much. And I think with this we conclude our panel because of time issues. Thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to the last panel. I invite you to take the floor, or to take your seats, sorry, for the closing session. And I'll ask Mr. Danilo Turk to stay there, and Antonio Vargas, Diego, and Carlos Romero. I had said that we had a very intense agenda with very interesting sessions. I don't think I was lying. As our colleague said, I fully identify with the desire to ask more questions, and I hope we'll have many ideas to continue discussing over the next few days about how we can take some recommendations from this session forward. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Carlos Romero again so that he can start his closing words. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, I would like to say that, well, I mean, many things have been mentioned about the AI legislation, which is an AI legislation that's now been negotiated. What I can say is that just single link in the chain, just a representative of the digital transformation ministry in the permanent representation of Spain in the EU. And my role is to facilitate the conclusion of this discussion, a discussion that will be intense. The Parliament will vote on the legislation between the 8th and the 11th of May in commissions and then in a plenary session. We hope the Swedish presidency, with their kindness, will be able to allow us to start working in this in June with multiple technical meetings. And I think the co-legislators are aware of the need to conclude this regulation in this legislative period, because it's a necessity. Whole afternoon we've been discussing this, and the only thing I'm going to try to do is to just give the best contribution I can. And bearing in mind the Spanish presidency of the EU at the end of the year, I will try to bring together the interests of my 27 colleagues to try and conclude with the Parliament a legislation that is very much needed, that can strike that balance between being an ethical legislation, which is what it aims to be, but also a legislation that promotes innovation in the EU. Those are the two things that are being considered by the co-legislators. And I'd just like to conclude by saying we'll try to do our best there. Thank you.
Thank you on behalf of AWS for your kind participation in this session. We have a strong commitment with Europe and Spain in particular, in order to try and instill trust, also investing in talent and the development of digital skills to accelerate sustainability in Spain, to boost the economy and to empower corporates and to make innovation possible. For that, we have strong wishes to cooperate with the Spanish government under the Spanish presidency of the European Union to ensure we increase international cooperation, because this is key in order to ensure interoperable regulation that can promote innovation and protection of rights, to ensure cooperation among the different actors which are needed in the field of artificial intelligence. Last but not least, we are on your side. We want to work together to boost the improvement and knowledge on AI. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Club de Madrid, of course, I wish to use these 2 minutes to thank the Senate of Spain for hosting us and for being our partner, to the Chamber of Deputies, and of course, above all, to the Amazon Web Services, which is our main creative partner and actually a driver of this discussion. We are very happy to have such partners, and as you have seen, the Club de Madrid members, 3 of us who are here and our very able secretariat, are trying hard to be helpful and to bring ideas and perhaps also suggestions that could help moving this important agenda forward. We do so with full respect and great appreciation for the role of Spain in this context. The regulatory sandbox of artificial intelligence is a very innovative and very promising project, which we hope will help the European Union to move forward. The Center for Algorithmic Transparency in Seville is another one, and we very much support this approach of the government of Spain and its role in the European Union and more broadly. There will be many opportunities this year and later at the universal level, at the general global level, and at the European level to move this discussion forward. We will be very happy to do our part and to help to the extent we can. And to conclude, once again, we are very grateful to you and we wish you all success in the future. Thank you.
La jornada ya ha sido clausurada, pero de forma informal quería pedir, por favor, si los socios, ponentes, facilitadores que quedan en la sala se pueden acercar para una foto de familia aquí a mi izquierda, por favor. The session has already finished, but please, any speakers, partners, or facilitators are still with us. If they can join us for a family photo, please here to my left, I would appreciate it. Thank you.